Okay. We will call this meeting to order. And we will begin with the first item, which is number 2 on the agenda, with discussion on the Army Corps of Engineers. Mr. Nelson.
Actually, that'll be Paul Underwood with the Corps of Engineers, and his team will be up making this presentation.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Paul Underwood. I'm the Design Branch Chief at the Los Angeles District Corps of Engineers. And we just wanted to present some design changes that we have on the Alcoa Dike project. This is part of the overall Santa Ana River project, as part of the Prado Dam project, to protect several properties from the future inundation behind Prado Dam. So if you look at the screen, you guys have that in front of you. This is the alignment for our flood protection feature, and there's no change in this alignment. There's no change in this the location of this alignment from previous versions that you would have seen. There's a couple of changes though I wanted to highlight, just bring to your all attention, and that is we did the project was put on hiatus for a while, and I guess part of the good news that I'm sharing today is that we're federally funded and we're going to be awarding a contract at the end of our fiscal year, which is September 2018. So that we're on track to award this project. As we got the funding and we went back to the design, we re-looked at our hydraulic design, and we determined that the flood control dike had to be raised a few feet. It's not a large change, but it's going to be a little bit higher, and it varies across the length of it, but in the range of 1 to 2 feet in general. And so that's one thing I want to bring to your attention. It's going to be a little bit taller. The other thing is, one thing that's always been a part of this project is a few road relocations. One was the road relocation for Auburndale and Rincon and Butterfield roads. And all of these were intended to go up over the top of our flood control feature. And Auburndale in particular, we've just recently made a design decision that I think it takes away some of the complexity of the design, and it actually removes the road relocation for Auburndale and also for a section of Rincon. I wish I had a laser pointer. I don't know, is there one? That doesn't work. Where Auburndale crosses our alignment, the road was going to go up over the top of our dike, and because there were sight distance problems when you went over the top, we had to raise Rincon on the other side, and that provided the necessity of some utility relocations as well within that section of Rincon. So what we're doing now is we've decided that we're going to put in a flood gate that will, when our project crosses Auburndale, we won't have to touch Auburndale hardly at all, but we'll have a floodgate that will only be closed when there's an extreme flood event coming down the channel and also behind the dam, and the dam is backing up. And by using a floodgate and by not relocating Auburndale, we're able to, it also, the relocation for Rincon is also taken out of the equation, and several utilities do not need to be relocated in that one section. So that's in a nutshell the changes that we wanted to bring. We have a couple of artist renderings of where this gate would be. If you'd like to look at that right now, or if you have any questions, go ahead and go to the next slide. This is Rincon Road going diagonally, and then Auburndale. You can see where our flood control feature comes across with a floodgate. This is with it closed. Go ahead and go to the next one. It's a closer up shot. This is what it would look like when it was open, which would be almost all the time. And then go to the next slide. This is just a little bit closer shot of what it would look like. And so with that, we were asked to come just present those changes to you, and so that you would know what it is that we're intending. So I guess I open up to any questions.
Okay, a couple. Can you go back to the original slide that shows the overall construction area? Yeah. So you say it's going to be a little bit higher. What is the range of the height?
Let me check my technical staff. Guys, I know it's 1.5 feet on the one side. What is it? The height of the raise?
Not the height of the raise. What is the
Oh, height of the-
highest and lowest of the dike itself
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it 20 feet? It's about 20 feet.
from the adjoining grade level?
Yeah, so it ties in on one end, it ties into high ground. The other one, it's high ground, but it kind of tapers off. But at the highest point, it's 20 feet.
Now, you had mentioned road relocation, so how does Butterfield still go over the dike at that point, or what is the situation there?
As far as I understand, the current wishes of the city of Corona is to put it over the top, is to relocate Butterfield to go over the top of our feature.
And I assume the dike probably is not as high in that area because Butterfield's already higher ground than the adjoining areas. So it's not like you're 20 feet up from
Right.
the grade level of Butterfield.
Do we know the height difference there, James? I think it's in the neighborhood of about 13 to 14 feet from the road surface now to the top of our dike at Butterfield.
And then that gives you enough room from Smith to get up to that climb?
Right, well, that'd be part of the road design that's put together. We'll take all that into account to make sure that the road, it starts at the place it needs to start.
Right, but Smith is very close to there, so
Yeah.
you've got that. Now, what about Corridon then? Do we lose Corridon completely, or does it also rise over?
You know what, I have to see where that street is. I'm not,
It's the one, again, we don't have a laser pointer, but it's the, right where Smith and Rincon join, the one that cuts off there. So it cuts off to the left? Yeah, right there. So where it goes up,
It'll stay on
it would
grade
cross
there, right?
over that.
yeah, it stays on grade there. There is a road relocation there as well. And it takes off just past that intersection and goes up over the top of our feature,
Okay, and then goes back
and
down.
then goes back down.
And then that area where it's on the other side of the dike would then be closed in a flood event.
Yes, yes. So the outside perimeter of that would be inside the basin,
Right.
should there be,
The airport, everything else would be
Yes.
underwater again.
yes.
And then Nelson and/or Darrell. So where the dike crosses Auberdale, that is partially city property there. What is the situation? Are we losing some of our property in this? Because I know originally we talked, and I don't think you guys were probably part of the discussion, but the area off to the far right is owned by the County of Orange. And one of the options we had given to the Army Corps and to the county was to move the dike higher and/or closer to Rincon or whatever needed to be done, and then actually build the dike around that white piece and swap the property, so you could actually flood our property, the city's property, in exchange getting access to the county property there and doing a swap. And Orange County had actually been a part of that discussion at one point. Are you familiar with any of that?
I'm not personally familiar with that. Is that something? Well, I do know that on the dry side of our feature, between our feature and Rincon, we have a couple of big ponding areas that take care of all the interior drainage. So when the flood does come up, our design we already have encapsulated in our design, capturing all the runoff from behind on the dry side, a place to capture that.
Right, but that's City of Corona property.
Right.
So is City
Actually,
of...
I'm not sure of the property ownership, but
It is.
I
So at
believe you.
Auburndale, it is.
yeah, okay.
So I guess the question is, is that being taken, or where are we at on that?
If I may, the county will be approaching us to purchase this property. In fact, the one reason I want to bring this to the council today is because you're going to start seeing more activities related to this project now coming to the council. We're obligated to pay for some relocation work along here, so we're bringing that to council, get approval for the budget for
Why are
that.
we paying for it?
Because the Corps has prior rights, and so we had utilities out there, and we are obligated to remove some of our facilities. Other facilities, they have to remove at their cost. So we've gone over each one of those utilities, to find out who's paying for what. There's also some betterments. You mentioned Butterfield. As it goes over that, that's a betterment. They have prior rights to that location as well, so we'll have to pay for the road betterments as that. But we did talk about the property the city owns right there where the dike's going through. The county's looking at that to acquire that property. We did talk about if there's a possible for a switch, and so we've thrown that out there as something to consider, but we haven't finalized any of that yet.
Well, it would be nice that if we're going to have that property purchased by the county, that that purchase price is not less than what we're ending up putting out to make this project whole. So, I mean, I don't want to get $100,000 for that property and be out $5 million, basically. You get what I'm saying?
I do, but they're separate issues. So the costs
They
are
are, but they're
okay.
not. So I mean, those are things that we need, because we're talking the county of Orange, not the county of Riverside, correct?
That's correct.
So we had always offered to swap that property at no cost with them that's at Lincoln, which would then allow them to flood our area easier. And they were the ones that actually came here for that discussion. So before these nice gentlemen build a 20-foot dike through there, it would be nice to kind of finish those discussions if we could.
We are. And we are having those discussions. They're not finalized yet.
Okay. I know that's not part of your deal. But it's part of our, but it's part of our deal.
Yeah, and we're all bound together in this. So.
I was going to say, it may not be part of their deal, but it certainly affects the progress on yours. So we really need to make sure before we move forward that that is resolved.
Yes.
Any more questions, Mr. Haley?
Important to me is I live there. I live about a 5-iron from where you're talking about, okay? Auburndale Street, let's talk about Auburndale. Right now, whenever it rains, Auburndale closes. Are you going to do anything to mitigate that issue?
No, our current plan is, I think our current plan is that would still operate the same as is now. We're not modifying that road. Our goal is flood protection, like I said, when the basin floods, and to protect all the properties that are on this side of the feature.
When you say this side, which,
When I say this side, it's hard I wish I had a laser pointer.
yeah, preparation is really important here.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with that.
Thank you very much. When you come back, you can,
If you had a battery,
that'll be great. That'll be great. Now, the other thing I have to ask you is, on this map that we have, how much of this belongs to the Army Corps?
a substantial portion of the property is owned by the Corps of Engineers.
That's you.
That's me.
Okay, good.
Not me personally, but our organization. And
I
then-
get that.
And also in Orange County.
Okay, I get that. I'm going to stand up for a minute, and I recognize the fact that we're not on, the microphone may or may not pick it up, but I want to point at something, and I want to discuss it with you, okay?
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
It is.
Okay, thank you very much. This area here appears to me to be the old golf course. Is that safe to assume?
You know, I'm not familiar with where the old golf.
Yes, and Orange County has already purchased that.
Orange County, forgive me, but Mr. Martinez just said that Orange County owns that,
Yes.
but you don't. Obviously, you don't, because you both can't. So you own from here down?
No, we do. The city does.
Okay.
That was the property I was in question with them about.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's my issue. We've had some horrible fires all over. My son lives in Mendocino, so we don't have to talk about that. And there's been a lot of talk about fires being caused by wildfires in abandoned areas. What's the chances of you guys going through and taking care of all the grass out there?
Well, our purpose, we're authorized by the federal government for a specific purpose, and that purpose is flood control. And so there will be a 50-foot strip all the way around our structure that will be clear of large vegetation. But we do not have any clearing because of fire hazards. That's not
Okay,
part of our.
you or your associates might make a note about that, so next time you come back, you'd be better off to address that, if you would. Thank you.
Okay,
So you're here today to tell us what you're going to be doing?
that's right. Because it's different than what you were told before. We just wanted to bring you up to speed.
Okay, in the event of the horrible flood,
Yeah.
okay, is it safe to assume that this is what we're going to be looking at on Rincon Street? Forgive me, but on the second set of photos, I apologize, Mr. IT guy, for doing that to you.
Okay. So I'm sorry, what's the question? I can see it.
Good. So this green area that has, looks like it's light green with green stripes, there you go. This is what we can expect to see?
That's a rendering. It would actually it'd be hydroseeded. And so it'd be grasses. It'd be natural with grasses.
Okay,
That's
good,
what you'll see on that side.
super. Thank you.
So following up on that same gate, the flood gate there, besides the area that is hydroseeded, it looks like there's possibly a concrete wall. Is that what that's going to be right there at Almerdale? On either side?
Yes, you're talking about what appears to be kind of a purplish color?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you go to the last slide, because it has, they're a little bit closer shot of it. That will not be the color. It'll be a reinforced concrete. It will be a wall feature. It'll transition from an earthen embankment to a wall feature, just so we can have our floodgate operate. And there'll be basically some very, very large hinges on the end of those, and to be able to, operate that gate.
So you mentioned it won't be that color, but one of my concerns is that it will be multiple colors from graffiti. So is it going to be treated so that it is easy to remove graffiti?
As our agencies work with each other, if there's something that we could do, that's something we can talk about and discuss.
So can we be sure to include that, Nelson? I'd rather have it taken care of when it's going up than try to fight later on that,
All right.
because I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's a good point, Mr. Scott. And no, Mr. Montanez. He wants to paint a design on it. Don't know what that would be, but. Tricentennial, okay. Are there any other
Can I
questions?
get one more, please? There are a packet of 3, and we were just talking about this gate. So this is going to be a sliding gate to stop the water?
Actually, it will be a hinged gate. It'll be swinging. It's
And it's going to be how high?
going to be roughly 15 feet high and about 37 feet long.
On a hinge.
Well, I'm simplifying it. It'll be a very elaborate bullhead structure that has the hinge operation in it. But yeah, it'll be a very, very heavy duty hinge essentially.
In their defense, in their best world, there would not be anything there but a dike.
I get that, but in their best world, there wouldn't even need to be a dike because there wouldn't be a flood. But we're talking, assuming that there would be a flood. Okay, now, are you going to be working with Mr. Nelson on our team?
Yes, we have been and we will.
We'll be doing
Good.
plan reviews.
Huh?
We'll be doing the plan checks and plan review of all the dike itself, everything within the city's jurisdiction.
Okay. This is the first I've seen of it. That's why I'm asking you so many questions. And
That's completely understandable.
thank you. And the last thing is, the size of this dike is 17 feet high.
Well, it's about 15 feet. I don't have the exact dimension, but in that neighborhood.
Higher than a basketball court, okay?
Yes.
And how wide, did you say?
About 37 feet. We have, it's actually it's a standard type of application throughout the country the Corps uses for floodgates. We've built one in Clifton, Arizona, about 20 years ago that's almost identical
Okay.
to this one.
Anything in Southern California that we could maybe take a day trip?
You know, I'm not aware of the Corps building a floodgate in Southern California. It could be something older than I'm aware of.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson? You got it.
Yeah, we have photos of the other floodgate too, I can show the council, so you have an idea what it'll look like.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, actual photos and not renderings.
No, that's an actual photo of the gate that he mentioned in Arizona.
Right.
So we have a good idea what it looks like and how it'll operate.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we can move on. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, for this next item on the agenda, discussion regarding Prop 64 and potential regulation, what we're going to do is we're going to have a staff presentation. Is Mr. Derleth here? Oh, there you are. Okay. And then we're going to have 3 separate presentations by 3 different companies moving forward. Each one, as a group, will have 10 minutes to speak. So whoever speaks, so there is one person for all 10 minutes, or you can switch off, but each one will be timed for 10 minutes. And we'll begin with, and then we will have the staff conclusion and then public comment. So there will be ability for public comment after that item, and then we'll have public comment afterwards for anything else that's not on the agenda. So we'll begin, Mr. Derleth.
Thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. Our presentation today is going to be presented by myself, John Higginbotham from my office, Joanne Coletto, your Community Development Director, James Patton, your Police Chief, and Tom Moody, DWP General Manager. What we'd like to start by saying is that today is not about medicinal marijuana per se. It's not about the current use of medicinal marijuana. We will not, the city does not and will not adversely impact what individuals are allowed to do under state law when it comes to medical marijuana. So we want to make that clear if anybody's worried about anything that we discussed today having an impact on an individual's ability to take care of themselves under the current medical marijuana regulations. We don't intend to change anything we're doing, and we protect their rights under state law as an individual to do those things. We'd also like to start by indicating that, as you all know, Corona has had a long history of prohibiting medical marijuana dispensaries and other commercial-related businesses. Our first prohibition was adopted about 12 years ago, and Corona has one of the first published cases relating to medical marijuana prohibitions. That was Corona versus Knowles back in, well, it was published back in 2008, but I believe it began probably right around the time of our initial prohibition in 2006, if not earlier. Since that time, the city has shut down at least a couple dozen illegal medical marijuana dispensaries. And as you'll hear later, we've done that as recently as the last 12 to 18 months after the passage of Prop 64. What does Prop 64 allow? Well, before we start talking about that, I want to mention the fact that it's a little bit of a misnomer to be talking about Prop 64, although that is what everybody casually refers to it as. But in actuality, the Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulations and Safety Act, MCRSA, is really the legislative dictates of what we'll be talking about today. We'll continue to use Prop 64 just casually, but from a technical standpoint, this state legislation is essentially replaced Prop 64 and consolidated it with another legislative enactment, which was MRSA. But again, we'll continue to just refer to it as Prop 64 for ease of reference. We'd also like to note that today is not really about the details of what a city regulatory scheme would look like. If you provide direction to us today to regulate the recreational use of marijuana, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think the folks who speak today on behalf of the industry will probably agree to that there is a lot of work that would have to be done in terms of coming up with our regulatory scheme. Today is about the big picture, about whether we go down that road or whether we continue our current prohibition of any commercial activity. So what does Prop 64 allow? Well, we'll start by first talking about the personal use. It's really not what we're talking about today per se, because again, we're talking about commercial regulatory issues. But when it comes to personal use, Prop 64 allows folks aged 21 years or older to possess, process, transport, purchase, obtain, or give away marijuana. It allows them to smoke or ingest cannabis or cannabis-related products. And it also, from a cultivation standpoint, allows a certain amount of cultivation in their personal residences. When it comes to the state licensing of commercial operations, this really went into effect on January 1st of this year. And basically it says that all businesses that wish to operate in the commercial arena of recreational marijuana are required to have a license. That license is good for a year. And no state license will be issued if it is contrary to what you allow in your city. So for instance, we have had to register with the state to tell them that we currently prohibit all commercial businesses, medical or commercial marijuana businesses, and therefore the state will not issue a license for somebody to conduct a commercial operation within the city of Corona. Each location needs its own license, and one thing that I did not note on the slide here, but which is true, is a state licensed commercial marijuana business can only conduct business with other state licensed marijuana businesses. There's various types of state licenses, and we'll talk in a bit about what the various aspects of the commercial market are, but suffice it to say that there are licenses for the various aspects of the production, distribution, and sale. One thing that is worth noting on this slide is that in January of 2023, the state will begin allowing essentially very large cultivators of marijuana to enter the market. These are the Kirklands and the Anheuser-Busch, basically the very large operations to come into the market. But that will not occur for about 5 years. But what will be interesting and what is of concern to staff is how that will change the market and how that might change some of the financial considerations that the businesses who wish to operate in the city today, how things might change when the large operations enter the market in 5 years. With respect to our local regulatory options, there are basically a few different options that we have. It does not, Prop 64 does not require us to enact a regulatory scheme, and it certainly does not require us to act by a certain date, as some of you have approached me and asked that question. There was no date by which we needed to take any activity with our prohibition in place. It allows us to maintain our ban. The only thing it says is that we're not allowed to prohibit others, businesses from using our streets in order to conduct businesses in other jurisdictions. So for instance, deliveries, transportation, things like that. We cannot prohibit the use of our streets for purposes of being able to conduct authorized licensed activities in other jurisdictions. When it comes to regulations, we can regulate all or some commercial activities of marijuana. But as we'll get to in a minute, our concern when it comes to this is that once you begin to regulate some aspect of the operation, we believe that that door will not likely close, and in fact will likely open much wider as soon as you enter the market. The aspects of the marijuana business include research, growing, production, manufacturing, testing, distribution, and retail sales. As I indicated, once you begin in this arena and you start allowing some aspect of it, some have said, just allow the research portion, or just allow the testing, or just allow the manufacturing or the distribution. But it's staff's concern that once you allow that through policy pressure and/or initiative measures, you'll open the door to having to allow other aspects of the business. So from our perspective, if you're going to go down this road, be prepared to be involved in the entire commercial operation. We also believe that perception alone likely drives an increase in illegal businesses, and as I alluded to earlier, within 6 months after the passage of Prop 64, without the city doing anything to indicate that we were entering the business of commercial operation of marijuana, we had to shut down 6 new dispensaries. And often they would say, well, Prop 64 passed, so I thought we could do it. So we believe that once you begin to regulate in the market, if nothing else, the perception that the city has entered into the regulation of the entire marijuana industry will lead us to have to deal with illegal operations. I think it's safe to say that from staff standpoint, our primary concern is what the net cost will be to the city. What will the net financial impact be? The city has, it's well known that the city has current budget challenges, and it's well known that the entities are promising lots of revenue. And even the emails that are coming in indicating a support for the city to enter the regulatory business indicate that they believe that there's a lot of money to be had for the cities. What we don't know about and what staff's concern is really what that net money will be to the city. The city will have a significant amount of regulatory and enforcement staff and other costs to deal with, and there's going to be a timing gap. A lot of those staff positions, a lot of that cost for the city is going to be a certain expense that we have to enter into. We're going to have to hire those positions. We're going to have to gear up for the regulatory activities. But the revenue is going to be uncertain down the line. So it seems to us that you're really talking about a situation where you're investing with borrowed money, and all of the risk in that scenario is on the city. We're going to now venture into just talking about a few of the various aspects of the of what those fixed costs and related concerns are going to be. We're going to start with the Community Development Department, move to police, and then finish with DWP. So, Joanne.
Thank you. What I want to do for you today is I just want to give you a broad picture of what the responsibility is when it comes to the building department. And that also includes the fire department. So when I talk, it does include both inspection divisions. And I need to do that because we work collaboratively together. What one department does with respect to development here in the city and working with new businesses, it's not all done in one department. It actually takes multiple departments. So what happens when we have a business that comes into town and occupies a building? This is something that is ongoing for us with respect to inspections. So I'm just going to give you that broad overview. What our responsibility is when it comes to the inspection department, we are responsible for ensuring that the building complies with its occupancy classification. Every building in the city has an occupancy classification based on its use. And the reason we do that is that we need to make sure that there are safety controls that are put in place for the protection of that use and for the protection of life and property. And some of those controls that we are responsible for ensuring that are in place is like fire suppression and protection, areas of exiting from inside the building, as well as ventilation and a host of other things. Because what you have to remember, you have a group of people that are contained within an environment, and then you have an operation that's also going on within that environment. So if there is a situation or an emergency, we have to make sure that those people can exit that building properly. What I want to do today is just tell you very clearly that myself, as well as my staff, we are not experts when it comes to the cannabis market and its operation. We are clearly learning this for ourselves. And we retain information or get information from what's out there in the industry today based on other examples, whether they be in other states or what's going on in other cities. And we get that information through ICC, which is the International Code Council. So I don't have a lot of answers for you today that would involve additional research on our part, but I can tell you what's being discussed out there in our industry. So one of the things that you have with this operation is that you will have indoor commercial cannabis grow facilities. This is where the plants would actually be growing inside of an existing building. You also have cannabis processing that can take place in the building. And this is when the plant is actually processed down to a product that can be sold out to the market. There is also a testing facility that goes involved, and I believe that may have something to do with the state licensing. And when you hear from other presentations today, they would probably highlight on what, the operation is. And then there's also this extraction component. And this is where oil from the plant is extracted. And in order to do that, you have to use a solvent base. And the solvent is highly combustible. You then take the oil and the solvent, and I believe what you have to do is that you then have to boil it, and then you get the oil that's the product that's used in a particular end means. So that right there alone, if that's not contained and within a controlled environment, we can have a situation where we have highly combustible materials within the building. So some of the concerns for us would be ventilation. There would need to be an elaborate ventilation system within the building, especially when you're dealing with an indoor grow facility. As you know, plants thrive and survive on CO2. Therefore, these businesses need to enhance the CO2 inside the building in order to get a productive plant life. As a result of that, you have to have a gas detection system within that building, because if the CO2 levels rise and the plants are not absorbing it as fast as they're putting in the CO2, you have to have a system in place that will stop that production. And then you have to look at the exhaust system. So when you do that, you also have to be concerned about odor control that would actually come out of that building, and that could affect public health. So how do we go about controlling odor from that operation to the external part of the building? There is also an increase in electrical demand when you're dealing with the grow because of the photosynthesis and how all that works. So we'll have a lot of issues with sub-paneling going on, and all of that is fine. We do that for many businesses. It's really coming down to making sure proper permits are being pulled and being reviewed by our staff as well as inspected by our staff. You also have a quantity of highly flammable products in control rooms. And again, that's all workable if it's contained within a control room. And then maintaining means of egress from the building. So really what it comes down to, and I could just give you an example based on this industry, when someone comes in and it's a fully permitted building, we go through their TI plans and we look at their TIs, we approve it. From the building side, we go out there one time after we do all the inspections, and once we close it off, once they've done all the inspections, the building department has no reason to go out there again unless they have a complaint. However, the fire department is the one that does annual inspections on the buildings to make sure that they're staying in compliance with the occupancy and that the quantity of hazardous material is also consistent with their permit. Many times when businesses move into town or go into a building, over the time, you know, you need to tweak something in your operation. Oh, let's move this around, let's move that around, and that happens a lot. And they don't think to call the city. So it's normally on those annual inspections, you find out, well, they blocked something, they added something that wasn't there with part of the original permit, the electrical has been expanded, new sub-paneling has gone in. So for us, from what we're hearing in the industry, we don't know if this is now going to require the building inspection team to go out there once a year, twice a year, or 3 times a year, because this is a moving part in order to accommodate their operation. So when we talk about that fixed cost, we just don't know what that is at this time. But what we're hearing is that we could be out there one day, and in 3 months or 6 months, the operation inside the building can change again to accommodate their operation or their demand. So those are some of the unknowns that we have at this time. Also, as Dean said, when it comes down to enforcement, this is something that falls upon a different division, and this is our code enforcement division. When we go out and discover that a building is not operating in compliance with the municipal code or with the building code, we then proceed to go down the path of enforcement in order to gain compliance. This flow chart here for you, I think you can see it better on your screen, but it just really demonstrates to you the repetitive process that we need to go through in order to gain compliance. When we go out there the first time and issue a notice of violation and a cease and desist letter, we do have to give somebody the opportunity to cure the violation. We just can't immediately go out there and start issuing administrative citations. We have to provide them the opportunity to come into compliance. We normally then go back out in 14 days to see if they have come into compliance. If not, we then start the administration citation process. We also need to give them another several days to come into compliance before we start going into the route of doing daily citations. The daily citations for us is where the monetary impact hits these businesses. And normally what we start doing, we not only start citing the tenant, we start citing the property owner, because there's many times where the tenant will ignore us. And if one day they decide to pack up and leave town, we have nothing left to hang on. So we do have to put that burden on the property owner. And the council is very familiar on our approach when we had to deal with illegal billboards. That was how we were able to gain compliance, because we put the pressure not only on the company, but as well as the property owner. This becomes a repetitive process where for months and months on end, our staff will be going out there and doing this daily routine until they get compliance. So that is another concern we have with respect to the staffing and the time that they would need to spend on doing this. And I believe we'll turn it over to Chief Patton.
Good afternoon. As far as the police department, I wanted to hit 3 areas of concerns for us. And Joanne spoke about the first one, and so did Dean, about staffing. And when we look at, we would expect that the police department would have to uptick in our staffing levels. We've seen other agencies increase, depending on what levels that they do bring in these businesses, depends on the amount of officers or detectives that they bring into this. We saw Santa Ana increased their law enforcement positions by 6. We've seen them 1. Depending on the agency and the amount. With our staffing, just to kind of give you, for us to hire is anywhere from to hire to get that person into position, the background, the training, it's anywhere from 12 to 18 months to get that person into the spot and then to allocate that to this regulation. The other area would be crime. And when I speak about the crime, more looking towards the retail businesses, and because you're dealing mostly with the cash-based business, the concern is you have people coming in and out of those business, and the potential for those wishing to take advantage of those people coming in and out with the cash, because this is mainly a cash business because of the banking industry. That is a concern. Also, the business themselves being a target of robberies because, again, it's a cash-based business. And then also, we would expect that we would have an increase in the reporting of illegal businesses by those legal businesses. Obviously, if you see a business that's not operating and it's permitted, those the businesses that are permitted would be calling us and asking us to get those shut down. And we would expect an uptick in that. And the last area would be the Colorado experience and what we've learned from Colorado and the statistics out of Colorado. I've get a stat sheet yearly from the Cal Chiefs organization, and it's out of the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking area. And the last report I got was October 2017, and it directly deals with Colorado. Just a few stats that are a concern, especially for law enforcement, the fire department, the medical field. Marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 66% in the 4-year average from 2013 to 2016 since Colorado legalized recreational marijuana. The 2015 results show Colorado youth ranked number 1 in the nation for the past month marijuana use. For the Colorado college age past month marijuana use for that same year was 61% higher than the national average. And the yearly rate of emergency room department visits related to marijuana increased 35% after the legalization of recreational marijuana. As I said, these are stats that are concerning for the first responders because we're going to be directly dealing with those issues. So, thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon. The utility looks at it in a couple of different ways. So the impacts of concern, when we talk about a cultivation or growing operation, electric is one of the concerns that comes up. Indoor cannabis cultivation is a resource-intensive process. There are high energy demands. The gray market has high energy theft. The grid impacts due to increased growth in both commercial and in residential areas. SCE has noted an increase in fire panels, increased usage to where it's affecting not only just the house itself or the industry, but also the infrastructure that feeds the surrounding areas to that. One of the things is producing electricity in the United States is responsible for about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. And through climate change programs and actions that we've taken, we've had a zero base increase in that. In contrast, Denver's demand has increased 1.2% annually for greenhouse gas and climate change. So they are seeing the effects of that just due to the cannabis industry increasing that demand. The increase in fires is typically related to diversion. So Southern California Edison has identified that 90% of the homes that they visit that are related to grow facilities typically have some sort of panel diversion. That diversion is taking a residential panel that's seeing a less than 20 kilowatt usage and seeing 300 to 500 kilowatts. What that means is it's a 200 amp panel that's seeing a 50 to 100% increase in load usage. So a 200 amp rated panel that is typical for an occupied home is seeing upwards of 300 to 400 amps being drawn through there. And what that does is that physically melts the equipment together, which then causes the short, can cause the house fire, and can actually back that all the way up to the utility transformer pole. SCE and others have dedicated teams, revenue protection teams, trying to find out and locate. So staffing is not only an issue with city resources, it's also a staffing issue within the industry. Anybody who's affected by this or who is involved with this is having to increase their staffing levels, which ultimately increase cost of service overall. From the water and wastewater industry, we look at sewer system impacts and groundwater impacts. So The pollutants that are associated with growing industries are nitrates, typical farming and agriculture, also nitrates, phosphorus, pesticides, and fungicides. Those impacts that biocides are obviously one of the constituents that interfere with the wastewater treatment process. The wastewater treatment process is a biological process where we grow certain biological bugs, for lack of a better term, and they participate in that process. So if you're introducing something into the plant that's intended to kill bugs, that kills the wastewater treatment plant process and will have an impact on overall water quality. As Joanne mentioned, the cannabinoid extraction process, basically pulling out the oils that are associated with cannabis, is using a solvent base. One of those solvents is hexane. That is a very highly flammable solvent, and that is not allowed to be discharged to any sewer system. Just due to that, when it can get into the process, it will explode. Alcohol is also used, and alcohol in small quantities is typically not a problem, so it would depend on the manufacturing size facility that's using that. Food production using the oils associated from that process are going to be similar to restaurants. They're going to have grease interceptors. One of the things that we do not like in the sewer system are fats, oils, and greases. So anything that's being transferred into a food, baking items, anything that's going to create fats, oil, or greases, they would have to have interceptors, grease interceptors to collect that. Those would have to be maintained. If they were bypassed for any reason, that could lead to sewage overflows out into the community. Sewage overflows into the community, then again, if they're not captured in time, can get to the storm drains, and then that would also have an impact on waters of the U.S. The cannabis dispensaries, the solid waste and recycling measures associated with the cannabis dispensaries, any product that is, and this goes along with the manufacturing as well, any products that are not used or can be used in either the oils or any of the waste products associated with that are going to have to be brought in, mixed with cardboard, recycling, something that makes it difficult to actually get the remaining product out or usable. And then again, you have this waste product that's going to need to be dealt with in some fashion, whether that's the hazardous materials that will be taking it off-site or putting it someplace where it's stored. Storage of that type of product in the paper industry and any of those other industries that do that similar process, storage of that type of product has to be closely watched due to other fire hazards associated with that. Currently, the state water control boards do not have a lot of regulation associated with this industry, so they are looking at writing and drafting that. That's obviously a concern to us if there's not a real strong regulation component that's going to help us protect the waters of the U.S. Our core responsibility in both the water and wastewater department is protecting public health, and we do that not only by the products that we generate and dispense as in water and recycled water, but we also do that by protecting the ground and the environment associated with doing the natural filtration. So if any of those items are impacted, that's a concern of ours.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. I'm going to share a few thoughts about some of the litigation aspects of this. Just by way of background briefly, I've been personally litigating marijuana cases for about 10 years now, for several years before we joined the city, and then for the past 5 to 6 since we've been here. I've personally been involved in probably at least 40 marijuana prosecutions in civil court and in various other administrative forums. Right now, the city's complete ban gives us the luxury of a relatively easy approach to shutting down illegal marijuana businesses. We have several tools at our disposal to do that, and they cover several different areas, including civil, administrative, and criminal, as well as code enforcement and building issues. Typically, the way that it goes when we become aware of a new dispensary, and as Dean mentioned, we had 6 open just last year alone in the aftermath of Prop 64, we'll become aware of it by virtue of either a citizen complaint or some other way. And within a day or so, code enforcement is out there inspecting, and usually within another day or two after that, we have a cease and desist letter out to not only the dispensary operators, but also the business that's leasing the property to them. We then have to wait a few days before we can start issuing administrative citations, but after about 10 days, we can start doing that, and we start issuing fines to both the property owner and the business on a daily basis until we get compliance. Sometimes that's enough to do the trick. Other times, we have to escalate it to civil enforcement as well. And because of our complete ban, going into court and getting a temporary restraining order and then a preliminary injunction is extremely easy. In the 10 or so years that I've been doing this, I've never lost a motion for a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction in Riverside Superior Court or in San Bernardino Superior Court in one of these cases. They're routinely granted because the issue is clear. Our ban says nothing, you can't do anything. And if they're doing something, they're violating the ban. So we always get the TRO. And we usually manage to shut them down very quickly. That in combination with the administrative fines and occasionally also the criminal avenues as well. In the past 5 years since we've been here in-house, there hasn't been a dispensary that survived more than a few weeks before we were able to shut them down. And we've gone through lengthy periods of time where we didn't have any marijuana dispensaries in town, in large part because of our aggressive and very effective approach to enforcing the city's ban. On the slide that you see there, there's a reference to one of the 6 that we had to shut down last year in the aftermath of Proposition 64. In fact, this was the first one that opened. And we became aware of it towards the end of January of last year. And within 6 weeks, we had it shut down, despite their valiant efforts to stay open. It was kind of funny, actually. The first time that the police went in there with a search warrant and took everything that was in the building, including all the equipment and computers and cash and product, within a few days, they actually reopened, and they were operating with candlelight, literally, and a portable generator, which, of course, created more safety concerns due to the flammable nature of some of the materials. So we had to go back in a second time, and the second time when we went in, we hired a subcontractor at an extremely modest cost to install what you see in the after pictures there, which is a metal security system, which essentially prevented anybody from getting in there, and that did the trick. They didn't manage to reopen after that. We did, however, continue to deal with the landlord in that business, and after a fair amount of negotiation, their attorneys ultimately agreed to reimburse the city for the entire amount of their security deposit, which in these cases tends to be substantial. You don't just put down a month, you usually put down a lot more than that. In this case, they put down a $30,264 security deposit, and the landlords agreed to pay that entire deposit back to the city in settlement of the administrative fines that had been issued against them. So a good example of the ease and the beneficial financial outcome of that particular case. Dean mentioned a few minutes ago that there are fixed costs potentially associated with enforcing our marijuana laws and potentially dealing with new dispensaries. There are also variable costs, and I'm going to speak to some of those here. With our current staffing of just 3 attorneys, we don't really have the bandwidth to deal with a full-blown regulatory regime. So the options would be one of 2 things. We would either have to hire another lawyer, as Santa Ana did when they decided to regulate, or we would have to significantly increase our use of outside law firms, which right now is extremely low. We estimate that number could be multiplied at least double and potentially many times over, depending on whether or not we had to deal with complex litigation. Another aspect of this, which is worth noting, is that right now with our current ban, it's really easy to shut down the business because it's a question of law. The law says you don't get to do it. If you regulate, then it becomes a question of fact. And questions of fact don't get proven on the first day when you go in for a TRO. They get proven over a period of time when you have summary judgment motions and eventually trials. So dealing with questions of compliance versus questions of complete nonconformity with a ban are much more complicated to litigate. It goes from being a matter of days potentially to being a matter of years. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, years of litigation tends to be very expensive. A good example of that is our recent experience with the billboard litigation. As you know, we've been in litigation with a group that put up an illegal billboard for about the past 3 years. And that is in large part a function of the fact that we have exceptions to our billboard ordinance that allow relocations of existing billboards. So we're being sued because of our relocation exception, and that's a question largely of fact rather than a question of law, which has led to years of litigation in which I personally have spent over 1,000 attorney hours litigating that case at a cost, had it been in private practice, of, would have been north of $500,000 in all likelihood. Another good example that's up on the slide there is the massage business. We've also been litigating those issues for the past several years with considerable success. But for every legitimate one, there tend to be several illegitimate ones. And there's every reason to believe that the same thing will happen with the billboard, or with the marijuana industry. If you allow a few of them in, you're going to have many more who don't get let in who are still going to want to do it. And you're going to have potentially equal protection type challenges similar to what we've seen in the billboard case. The massage industry is another good example of the challenges that the state has faced in trying to regulate that industry. A big part of the problem that we have there is the state took it over for a number of years and tried to regulate it. And unfortunately, they didn't do a very good job of that and eventually dumped it back in the city's lap. But our concern is similar here. The state doesn't do a particularly good job of regulating cash businesses that are in this realm. And they're just barely starting to write regulations now. Those laws and regulations are a work in progress, and we don't have a great deal of confidence that they're going to be effective in regulating in that area. Switch to the next slide. So if we do end up having to litigate, what are some of the likely costs? I've been to a number of seminars on this since Prop 64 was being considered, and the general consensus seems to be that you're going to have to prove noncompliance through forensic-type audits. And of course, there are already businesses like HDL that are springing up offering their services. But having litigated for the past 18 years, I can tell you that hiring forensic auditors is very expensive. In a case like this, you can only imagine the amount of effort that would be involved in trying to prove that a marijuana business was not operating the way it was supposed to be operating through forensic accounting audits. The likely cost of having to do that in a major litigated case would probably be a six-figure number. Again, with respect to constitutional challenges, as we've seen in the billboard case, if you have to defend an equal protection lawsuit, you're probably looking at several years of litigation, potentially in state and or federal court, going up through the courts of appeal, easily a 5-6 year proposition at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars if you win. That's just if you have to pay your own lawyers. If you lose a civil rights case, a federal civil rights case, or even a state civil rights case, you're paying the plaintiff's lawyer too. And their attorney's fees tend to be fictitious, so they can make up whatever they want at a ridiculous hourly rate. And it's not unusual in that type of case to see attorney fee requests after a plaintiff has prevailed in the multiple millions of dollars. Let's talk for just a minute about secondary effects. The chief mentioned the Colorado experience. We've already started to see that kind of thing here. Just a few years ago, unfortunately, we had a tragic car accident on 6th Street here in Corona where a 22-year-old girl was killed by someone who was driving under the influence of marijuana and decided to go down 6th Street at 100 miles an hour and run every single red light along the way, including the one where he hit her. There's every reason to believe that that sort of thing will increase here, just as it has in Colorado, where marijuana traffic-related fatalities have more than doubled since marijuana was legalized there. Let me give you another example, a personal one that I've been involved in. When we were in private practice at BB&K before we came in-house, I was responsible for litigating marijuana cases on behalf of several other cities, including the city of Colton. One of the cities that we were litigating with there had the good fortune of being the subject of a federal raid by the DEA, which I got to tag along for, which was quite interesting. But another one that was in town had an armed security guard, and they, of course, thought that was a good thing, as many of the proponents of these types of businesses will argue. We have security guards, so that's going to make it safer. What actually happened there was just the opposite. They had a security guard, but unfortunately the armed robber that came in to steal the cash got the jump on him, so he didn't pull his gun yet. But as soon as the armed robber left the building with all the cash, the security guard popped up, drew his gun, started chasing after them, and unloaded his entire magazine from his automatic pistol into the neighborhood, striking a house multiple times. Fortunately, nobody died, but you can only imagine what the outcome could have been there. So there's significant risks from a secondary effect standpoint of having marijuana businesses in town versus having them on the periphery. Another issue that we anticipate having to deal with if we get into the regulatory business is the increase in workers' compensation claims relating to exposure to the fumes, the chemicals, whatever else they may encounter. And we already get claims like that in other contexts, not marijuana, but other types of exposure claims on a fairly regular basis. And there's every reason to believe that if our people have to start regularly inspecting marijuana-related businesses, that we're going to see an uptick in those types of workers' compensation claims, which will be difficult to evaluate because the law in this area is so unsettled and still barely just starting to develop. Another issue, of course, is the fact that marijuana, despite what California is trying to do, is still illegal under federal law, as our Attorney General recently reminded us, and there's no reason to believe that that's going to change anytime soon. The corollary to that, of course, is that it's illegal to deposit the proceeds of such businesses in banks. So while the state is still trying to come up with creative solutions to that problem, there's no reason to believe that the federal law on that issue is going to change anytime soon. The industry advocates, of course, will downplay that, as they often do with most concerns, but it's still a very real concern from a money laundering point of view. And of course, there's also the issue of federal grants. As you know, we get a lot of grant funding from various sources, including the federal government, state. A lot of times, those grants are tied to compliance with other types of laws. And there's, of course, a risk that we're concerned of, that if we contradict the federal government in this area, that there is a risk that they could pull the plug on other types of grants which are potentially tied to our compliance with federal law. So that's an issue that we need to be somewhat mindful of. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dean.
So to summarize from the staff's perspective, the question is why now, right? We believe that there's a benefit. Time is on our side, so to speak. It's not staff's opinion that this will never happen in Corona. You have the chance for initiative measures and the like. There's a good chance eventually at some point the city will be in a position of having to regulate the industry. But the question from our perspective right now is time is on our side. There's a lot to learn from the mistakes to be made by other cities. Regulatory issues, inspection issues, how the state laws and the regulations are going to develop. Some cities doing better jobs than others in terms of regulating, and we can learn from that. We can assess the federal issues and the banking issues. We can assess net cost impacts from other cities. We've seen the newspaper articles. We've seen the cities who have chosen to get into this regulatory environment, and we've seen the positive financial projections that they've made. We have yet to see a true net cost analysis of what those revenues are. And so from our perspective, there's value to be gained by waiting. And again, time is on our side, at least in terms of minimizing mistakes from our perspective. Are there any benefits to the city proceeding now? Yeah, we can chase the risk premium, as one of the entities told us, right? They're promising you money right now to get into the business, distribution, what have you. And they're promising development agreements tied to money. They're promising support of local tax revenues. They're promising you state tax revenues. And so there is a quote-unquote risk premium to be had by getting into the business now. The only problem is cities don't do risk very well. We don't typically chase risk, and we typically don't risk public monies chasing such risk. In addition, how long will that risk premium last? We think that there'll be declining prices, there'll be declining taxes. There's support for local taxes now, but we already know they're attempting, or at least arguing, to have state taxes reduced. That will continue to occur, we believe. As the larger entities get in the market, it's only natural that the prices on these products will come down. And so the pressure to reduce or challenge local tax measures will increase. Eventually, we believe that there'll be a shifting of the leverage. These entities now that are, attempting to woo the city with the revenues currently When the industry is up and running and it's no longer a necessity to woo cities, we believe there's a good chance that, the leverage will shift. And in a matter of years, there'll be like another industry. The car dealerships, for instance, who, yeah, we'll come to your town, but we want you to share with us the sales tax revenue, as opposed to promising the city additional sales tax revenue. We think there's a good chance you'll see that leverage shifting, and they'll be looking for opportunities to receive some of that sales tax revenue back to them. And so we end our presentation by really just asking a question: can we risk waiting more than we can risk failure by getting into the market too quickly? And again, we're not naive to think that the city will never find itself in this industry, but is now the time.
Does anybody have any questions? You want to wait to presentations first? Okay.
Chief Duffy, your department has a great reputation for doing inspections at different companies and industries. If you were to go out to my favorite, Acme Manufacturing, and find out that they were not in compliance, do you have to have reason to go back, or do you have to give them a warning to go back, or can you go back every 6 weeks if you chose?
We would have a reason to go back for the correction notice. So we would, if it was something that we found in an existing business, we would write a correction notice, give them time to remedy that. We'll come back for additional inspections until they're in compliance.
Okay, now, because you and your crew have been doing this for such a long time, you always get that gut feeling, but if you went out to, again, Acme, and you see, something is not right, could you still go back, or do you have to have a reason?
Well, fire department is different than, say, code enforcement.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to be in the buildings, in some cases annually. So we do have responsibilities as a fire department to inspect occupancies to make sure that they're being, the work and the processes that are occurring inside those buildings comply with the fire code.
Okay, super. Thank you, Chief.
I have a couple of quick questions. In anybody's research, I know that in my minimal in Riverside County, particularly on the western side, that the county has yet to move forward. They're working on putting together, and they're foreseeing it being quite lengthy before they bring something to the county. And I know that Riverside, they even sent a couple council members to Colorado to make direct conversation, as Chief Patton was talking about his knowledge of Colorado. Are there any other cities in the western Riverside County that have moved forward with this? Does anybody know? I'm just curious.
I don't know, maybe, I believe Marina Valley is looking at it.
I think Paris, if I remember, we had a mayor's meeting last Friday, and I believe Paris may have moved forward on it. But of the 28 cities in Riverside County, most of the ones that have moved forward are what, in the desert, aren't they?
I would say that's generally true. Again, we have not done an exhaustive research on that, but.
But there's none directly related to us. And I know people keep saying, oh, it's going to be happening in Home Gardens, but I don't think it's legal yet in Riverside County either, as far as a position on banning or not banning.
It's not legal at this point, as far as we know.
And my other question, Chief Patton, what determines a DUI under the influence of marijuana? How do you and your officers have that ability to determine that?
Right now, it's any under the influence of marijuana. So there are tests that they can do as far as balancing out. You do have to take a blood sample to get the ultimate results of that. But the state of California has no limit at the current time, like blood alcohol for driving under the influence of alcohol, 0.08. They don't have that for marijuana. So at the time, it's anything above a point, any nanogram.
Oh, so that anybody can be arrested for anything, even though it stays in your blood system for a while?
Correct. But you have to prove that there is actually impairment, and that's what you do when you do the field sobriety test. You obviously see that there's an imbalance there, and you're checking their eyes. There's steps that they go through as part of that. But as of right now, there is no above. I know this Colorado has a set nanogram level that they go by, but in the state of California, we don't have that yet.
So that makes it more difficult for the officers.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did anybody have any questions before we move forward with the presentations?
Mayor, if I can, looking at a document that was produced by WRCOG in the middle of January, it would appear that in terms of Riverside counties, you got Lake Elsinore that allows a few aspects: recreational, medicinal, cultivation, and manufacturing. San Jacinto, who allows cultivation, manufacturing, transportation, and storage. Paris, who allows cultivation. Lake Elsinore, that also I mentioned earlier, but they allow testing. And Riverside, that currently allows testing, but I think it's been fairly widely publicized that they are looking at additional allowance. So.
Okay, thank you. So we will begin with our first presentation. Who will be coming up for that? Anastas Holdings? Remember, the group has 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, honorable council members. Thank you for this opportunity to address you today. I'm actually joined up here by my colleague, Melahat Rafi. My name's Christopher Glue, and we're here to speak to you today on behalf of Doug Heldorn and Anastas Holdings Incorporated. I'm actually an attorney myself. I've actually been working with cannabis-related matters for over 2 decades. I've done everything from litigate these matters through the trial courts and criminal cases, civil cases, and regulatory matters, all the way up to the California Supreme Court. Dealt with landlord-tenant issues, zoning, helped cities with drafting ordinances, developed in lieu tax agreements, and also worked on development agreements. I'm going to start off by turning over the podium to my colleague Melahat Rafi, and then I'll come back to address you a little bit more about Anastas Holdings.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to commend the policymakers and the staff for addressing this issue. I know it's not easy to deal with. One of the benefits you have for waiting until now is that you can look at other municipalities. You're not pioneers. The state has had cannabis rules on the books since 1996, and you can look and see where it's worked well, where it hasn't. Even in Southern California, there are examples, whether it's Long Beach, Linwood, Maywood, Santa Ana, places to look to see what they did right, what they could have done better, and how you can make an even more perfect policy for Corona. We share the same goals: closing the illicit businesses and the shops that have littered the neighborhoods, that have operated in the shadows, that have taken from the public treasures because they're not paying any revenues into that. And the behavior that they exhibit is not good for any business owner, especially in the cannabis industry. Regulating the industry is more than just about revenue generation, which I know the city needs. So many cities need it. It's about creating good paying jobs. It's about building an industry that's going to allow for economic diversity, social programs, and whatever the city wants to build into it. You have an opportunity to build this policy from the ground up. Where cannabis businesses have been regulated and permitted, we see a decrease in local crime. And this is not me talking as an advocate, but UCLA and UCI both had studies released in late last year that indicated where you had regulated cannabis businesses, whether it was a dispensary, cultivation site, or manufacturing site, crime went down. Crime has gone down. A 2014 study found that from 1999 to 2010, states that had medical cannabis laws had a nearly 25% lower mean annual opioid overdose mortality rate than the states who had prohibited cannabis in any form whatsoever. Since the legal recreational marijuana sales began in Colorado in January of 2014, the state has seen a decrease of over 6% in opioid deaths, according to the research published by the American Journal of Public Health. The drop follows 14 years of rising opioid rates within the state. And so there's major benefits when you're addressing an issue like that in cities like ours. Regulating commercial cannabis businesses in the city is slated to bring in billions of dollars, millions of dollars, possibly billions of dollars, depending on what you want to do, how much you want to allow. Those are the funds that are used in Santa Ana, for example, to make sure they hired 6 additional police officers, had an additional attorney in their city attorney's office. None of that would happen without the resources and the funds from the industry. And you get to decide where those resources go. How much goes into public safety? How much goes into a social equity program? We would advocate social equity and community benefit programs encompassing everything from after-school programs to the beautification of projects throughout the city. As parents, I'm a parent myself, as parents we understand the concerns relating to youth access to cannabis. The number one way that's been proven scientifically over and over again to avoid that is after-school programs. In Santa Ana, the city is working with, the industry is working with the school district to fund diversion programs. In other parts of the region, same programs are going up, whether it's after-school programs or funding. We want to make sure that we're partners in improving the quality of life for the residents and the businesses in Corona, and a regulated market directed by you, directed by the policymakers and staff can lead the way.
Council members, I wanted to talk to you briefly about Mr. Doug Heldorn and Anastas Holdings. They definitely have been here in your community. Doug has a local business. He actually works with Pharmaceutical Containers for Ecology Corporation. And it's a very, sorry. Oh yeah, you can go ahead and start. You have a handout that we prepared for you, so if it's not going along with the PowerPoint presentation, you have all the materials we provided for you to review at your leisure. He has actually run the business here locally for over 20 years. He's got 30 years business experience working with these publicly traded corporations. They actually own a 13,000 square foot facility here in the lovely city of Corona. Medtainer is the name of the corporation, which is probably made in the USA and locally here in Corona. You can see the numbers and projections that we put forth. We talked about the 2.2 to 5.3 projected 3-year revenue. That's a lot of money for a lot of programs that the city gets to dictate, especially if they use an in lieu tax agreement, development agreement. They can dictate where that money goes. But I can keep talking about how Doug Heldorn can be a benefit to the community and how he's looking for full transparency and wants to be a great partner and all those great, wonderful things. But I'd like to specifically address some of the concerns that were brought up by the staff. So it's a little more productive that way. We work with Santa Ana. We've worked with them on this partnership with the cannabis community for quite some time. I'm actually the lead counsel for the Santa Ana Cannabis Collective Association, and we represent almost 20 members of the 20 licensed facilities in Santa Ana. And I can tell you, since day one, we've worked in very good harmony with the city. We have regular meetings with city staff. We collaborate with the chief of police. We collaborate with the city manager. We collaborate with chief planning. Everyone goes back and forth. We bounce ideas off each other. We fix the problems that aren't working, and we work to help bring more social equity programs to the community. If there is an issue with trying to get illegal shops closed, we work as partners. If there's an issue with trying to make sure that there's less impact on the community at large, we work as partners in that. The relationship, I would invite you to reach out to any of the city staff in Santa Ana locally. You can talk to the people in Desert Hot Springs, Cathedral City, Long Beach, Los Angeles. I would encourage you to see what their opinion of working with regulated cannabis operators has been like. The truth is that most people that want to work as regulated, licensed, legal cannabis entrepreneurs want to be partners with the city. They want oversight. They want you to make sure that they're doing things safely so that the community is not impacted. They want to have green businesses. They want purple pipes. They want renewable energy. They want to help make every city they're in a better place so that the next city is willing to embrace them and bring them in. They know it's been a hard fight for a lot of cities to adopt the cannabis culture. But in every city they've been in, all they've done is contribute to the local economy, better the local impact, or better the environment. They've also helped with law enforcement in closing the illegal operators. Most complaints and most problems that really come from the cannabis community are from the unregulated operators. It's widely known that there's shops all over Corona, Riverside, and all those communities. And those illegal shops are generating revenue that's not being taxed by the city, is having an impact on local residents. And quite frankly, that revenue, if it's going to exist, should be going to the people of the city of Corona in a form that the city can actually utilize to make its city a better place. We've dealt with the issue of homelessness. We've dealt with the opioid addiction issue in Santa Ana. And these are things that weren't really being addressed by any other partners in the community. So in that light, I'd like to say that I know Doug Heldorn and Anastas Holdings is committed to that type of social equity. They know they can be a good partner with the community. And we'd encourage you to look and ask questions with people that are already doing the medical marijuana and recreational marijuana programs. We thank you for your time, and if you do have any questions, we're always available. We'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
You have over a minute left. Any last words?
Oh, did you have any questions for us?
We'll wait till later for it. We just want the presentations first.
Sure.
We're making notes. So did you have anything else you want to say before? No, we're good. I'm impressed.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so next is Main Street strategy.
Good afternoon, Council, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And a big thanks to the staff for all the hard work that they've done. We've had numerous conversations, and I don't think these concerns that they've shared are unique to many cities, but I will go into that a little bit later. I'm Dustin Moore. I'm with Main Street Strategies. So do I have a clicker that? Okay. Sorry about that. So I want to talk a little bit about our team. We have a local operator as well that has a proven experience in Corona, that's worked for 30 years in a highly regulated industry, and is very familiar with revenue sharing agreements and how they work with the city of Corona. Not to mention, we have really in-depth subject matter expertise. I was the deputy campaign manager for Proposition 64, so I'm part of the reason why you are all dealing with this today, so my apologies for that. But through the drafting process, we worked with a number of local cities. We worked with the State Association of Counties. We worked with the police chiefs. We worked with the Sheriff's Association. And in that process, we had more stakeholder comments and iterations to that ballot initiative than I think any other one that came before that. So we really did try to reach consensus. From that experience, we've moved into the business and regulatory consulting space for licensed cannabis businesses throughout the state. My business partner, Josh Walters, who some of you have met, is not able to be here today because he's actually in Sacramento at a regulatory meeting. So we are well apprised of the actions that are being taken in Sacramento and the direction that the state is moving in. So long story short, our team is committed to building a community-focused plan and partnership here in the city. And what we want to do is work with the city to come up with a policy that is consistent with the values of Corona. There is a lot of work to be done. This isn't something that happens overnight, but we are here to start that process. So currently, we see essentially 3 paths that are available for moving forward. You guys can continue the outright ban and the moratorium that you have, which clearly is not going to bring any revenue to the city, and will continue to perpetrate a unfunded enforcement liability, which I think the staff outlined well, with respect to the DUIs, the other enforcement actions. Whether or not you act on cannabis in the city of Corona, people are still going to purchase cannabis, and you're still going to have external effects in this city. So that's just something that we believe will continue. The other option is a complete ordinance, and I think staff alluded to the fact that that could require a significant amount of time and council effort to get that through. You'd have to contemplate virtually every regulation that you would want to put in place for each one of these businesses. Not to mention that it's unlikely to be broadly utilized in the sense that, given your industrial makeup and the vacancies of the buildings that you guys have, it's not, unlike the city of Los Angeles or maybe the city of Sacramento, it's not like hundreds of businesses are going to be coming into the city of Corona. So we would submit that a full ordinance might be a little bit overkill and also very daunting on your staff. Additionally, it requires a tax measure to be placed on the ballot. So in order for you to receive any direct revenues from cannabis businesses, you would additionally have to run a tax measure. So finally, the process that we're here to talk about today is the development agreement process, which provides a turnkey proposal including an operator and a location. And it also allows for the city to collect revenue immediately. So from day one, the business would enter into an agreement with the city to provide a portion of the proceeds directly to the city. So let's talk about the costs of inaction. This screenshot, I think I've shown some of you in the past. This is from a popular website that cannabis consumers use to find cannabis in and around the city of Corona. And you can see it's completely dotted with businesses, from deliveries to the retail shops and home gardens that frankly are unpermitted. But they're not going anywhere, and people are going to home gardens, purchasing cannabis, driving back to the city of Corona, and as the deputy city attorney pointed out, driving under the influence and causing great harm. So I think staff has done a great job of outlining these concerns of surrounding unenforcement and unfunded enforcement liabilities. But again, we believe that will continue regardless of the action you take today. But keep in mind, all of those businesses that you saw on that website are currently, or many are currently unregulated operations. And again, the city is not receiving any revenue to offset the impact from those sales. And additionally, right now, there's a legal question at the state level of whether or not, even if a city bans cannabis outright, if they still have to provide reasonable access to patients through the method of delivery. Now that has not been settled. There's arguments on both sides, and in fact, there's a piece of legislation that's going to be coming forward in the near future to address that. So even if you ban everything outright, there still will be cannabis in the community. And failing to develop a regulated cannabis marketplace is not going to eliminate the availability of cannabis given these operators. And an absence of a regulated market, we've seen historically, the absence of a regulated market encourages more illicit operators to come to your city. By having a regulated marketplace, less illicit operators will come. I mean, they're going to understand that there are regulations in place, and given the fact that the state has a dual licensing system, I think that the city attorney's office did a great job of talking about the issues surrounding massage parlors and billboards, but these are not civil rights issues, and these are not, freedom of speech issues. It's a dual licensing platform. So if you do not have a state and a local license, you cannot be open, and that's codified in state code. So it's not under the collective nonprofit model. It was a little more challenging to investigate and to shut those folks down. But now it's clear what the state has said in their regulations and laws. If you do not have both licenses, you cannot operate. So they can be shut down, and I believe in a much more streamlined process than was outlined by staff. So our proposed solution is to implement a pilot program through development agreements for the city of Corona. Again, turnkey policy solution where we bring a developer directly to the city along with the dozens of businesses between ourselves and our strategic partner, California Strategies, who we have a letter to put on the record on behalf of them, to bring only the highest caliber operators to the city of Corona. And I know that there was the argument that time not being, time is on your side. Well, in a sense it is, but there are high quality operators in the state that are desperately looking for a place to operate legally. And once they've planted down somewhere, they're not going to move. In fact, they're looking to partner with cities and are entertaining very generous revenue sharing agreements. So the idea that waiting somehow provides an additional, or lessens the leverage from the other businesses, or somehow does away with your local control, I don't believe that's the case. And in fact, the idea that we're putting forward is a pilot program. So it's something that could be termed out over the course of maybe 2 years or whatever you so decide. So that way you can put your foot in the water, you can test cannabis, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, through the development agreement, it could sunset or it could expire. So you have the option to either sunset it into a complete ordinance that would then be accompanied by a tax measure, or after 18 months, 24 months, you guys can look at the data and say, this isn't working for our city, and you could shut it down. So we believe that there should be some flexibility for the city, that if this isn't working for you, then you should be able to get it out. However, to be able to get that group of businesses that are the top caliber, we urge you that you would act now. So this is something that's also going to prevent the establishment of a cannabis policy that doesn't benefit the community. There was mention of doing it through initiative. The cities where we've seen initiatives done, those initiatives do not reflect the interests of the cities that they're going into. In fact, they're usually written by the industry, and they're ramrodding policies down your throat that you may not want to partake in. So by putting a responsible policy in place now, it's arguable that no initiative will go forward. We have yet to see a city where there's a regulatory scheme that's working where somebody has come in and ran an initiative. So I think the idea that doing this through an initiative would not be in the interest of the community. And then again, providing immediate revenue for community priorities through the use of development agreements, including public safety funding and other vital city services. So offsetting some of these, these externalities that you're facing now with people coming in using cannabis and causing problems in your city, at least now you're going to have some revenue to enforce upon those actions. So that is our idea. And it is a proven approach. If you look, there's a number, actually 15 cities in the state that are using the development agreement process all over the state. So from the north to the south, they have all taken the opportunity, with the exception of a couple. I would say Desert Hot Springs has kind of dove in on this, full steam. But a lot of these other cities are just taking a more measured approach, testing the water and seeing how it goes. And the development agreement process has allowed them to do that. So the specific model that we're talking about through a development agreement process is a cannabis campus. And these are self-contained businesses that would be on the periphery of the city, and they're cannabis campuses that are properties that would be approved by the city
You
council.
have just a couple seconds left. So.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well, let me just jump ahead then, and we can ask if you have questions later. But essentially, the revenue projections are what I wanted to get to. And if you look at this chart, it totals out to $3.25 million a year. I've also provided a full proposal that was provided to you to look through as well. So I urge you at your convenience to look at that. But thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Okay, and our final presentation will be from Emerald Management Group.
No problem. Thank you.
Begin.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, staff. My name is Randall Longworth. I'm here on behalf of Emerald Management Group. If I can get this. So first of all, who is Emerald Management Group? Let me explain who we are first of all. We're comprised of industry experts and lifelong Corona residents and successful Corona business owners. Partners in Emerald Management Group represent the first licensed dispensary in Orange County. Partners in Emerald Management Group represent the first licensed dispensary in the Inland Empire. That's in the city of Paris. Partners in Emerald Management Group represent the first licensed cannabis distribution company in Orange County. That's called CMX Distribution. Partners in Emerald Management Group also represent multiple other licensed dispensaries, licensed cultivators, licensed manufacturers, licensed testers, and licensed distributors throughout the state. But specifically, localized to Orange County and the Inland Empire. Very localized. We've worked with multiple cities and local agencies in outreach and developing different regulations for different cities. We've written multiple laws. And some of the cities include Santa Ana, Costa Mesa, Adelanto, Long Beach, San Bernardino, Paris, and we're working right now with the city of Avalon over on Catalina. Emerald Management not only represents the first license, but multiple other licensed distributors and retailers throughout this city. So we know the area very well. We understand local politics and what types of regulations work. But the issue, as it said before, is why now? Why regulate now? Like some of the other speakers said, cannabis is here. Whether you regulate it here, the fact of the matter is it is here. The black market's here. I think we've seen that Weed Maps shot before, but that's this area, that's Corona. Those are all of the different locations that Weed Maps right now is advertising for this industry, and it's something that we want to get away from. But again, why now? It's the safer alternative. Regulation of cannabis today is simply the safer alternative. There are statistics out there, I understand. But in the first quarter of 2017, the latest statistics came out that in Colorado, DUIs, that is cannabis DUIs, are down 33%. Now, there are some other stats out there that say, look, there may be some deaths out there, some other issues out there. And here's the thing that we really need to analyze and we need to look at as it relates to some of these statistics. The fact of the matter is we're getting better now at identifying cannabis. We weren't good at it before. We're getting better at identifying it. So whether or not those stats are going up, we need to look at those numbers and determine. But boy, to say that cannabis-related DUIs are down 33% in the first quarter of 2017 speaks something. And I'll get to that in a minute, why I think it's so important that we talk about cannabis and we talk about Prop 64, because some of the resources ultimately that come from the state are specifically going to go to identifying DUI drivers and helping get those people off of the road. That's really what we want in this. I think this was already mentioned too, that opiate addiction and opiate deaths in cities, or rather states that allow cannabis, are down about 23%. In addition, that states that have legalized cannabis are not seeing increases in teen usage. So again, those stats can go both ways, but I think it's something that we really need to look at and assess what exactly we're talking about when we look at those. Now this slide, next slide talks about Prop 64 and specifically where some of these funds are going. We're looking at, the estimate is about $2 billion in taxation at the state level. But we're looking here is 60% go to youth programs, substance abuse eradication, preventment and treatment. 20% go to reduce DUI and health programs. And specifically what we're talking about is we're talking about coming up when you talk to the police in this, is to how do we determine whether someone is under the influence of cannabis? Well, we need money into technology to start finding out how we can have an easier detection of cannabis. Specifically, we're going to, they're putting money into looking at a breathalyzer test for this. That's really what we want. We need to identify this and we need to eradicate it, and the only way that we can do that is money. Some statistics as it relates to Prop 64, but 64 was passed with about 56% of the vote. In Riverside, it was about 52%. Here's another issue with regard to 64 I'm not too pleased about, and I'll tell you why. But it allows any residents to cultivate 6 cannabis plants. 6 cannabis plants. And the problem with that is in a non-commercial setting, when it is mandated by the state to allow residents to do this, they're going to do it in an unsafe manner. And we've seen this in Colorado, we've seen this in California, Oregon, and Washington. When the state is allowing residents to grow their own cannabis up to 6 plants, what they're doing is they're putting in hydroponic systems, they're putting in electrical systems, and they're trying to grow 6 plants, not like a little house plant, but trees. They're trying to get as much as possible, right? And the problem with that is it can lead to fires, it can lead to electrocutions, it can lead to poisons, contamination, and children access. Now, we can't get rid of that right now. That's part of Prop 64. But I think an alternative to that is the dispensary model, right? Is to allow an outlet, right? We're not going to go and have a still in our backyard that is dangerous when we can simply go down the road to the liquor store and get a six-pack of beer. I mean, I think that's a huge problem. And that's a problem that is right now, as of January 1st, in this city, in every city. So I think part of that should be is to look at the dangers of that. We're looking right now at 20 dispensaries right now are licensed in Santa Ana right now. They're doing about 2 million patients or customers a day. We anticipate about 10% of that right now is Corona and the surrounding areas are those customers. So when we talk about having dispensing here, we're also talking about traffic congestion, or rather trying to alleviate traffic congestion. If 10%, that's about 200,000 people a year going to Orange County to buy cannabis. On a return trip, that's 400,000 trips a year. Is this the end-all, be-all with regard to the 91? It's not, but boy, it's a step in the right direction, and I think it's something at least ought to be looked at by staff. Here's some other stuff when we talk about tax revenue. The closest thing that we can have right now is Santa Ana's budget. We don't have a lot of numbers from a lot of cities in California, but boy, we have some here. And what they're looking at, their projected revenue right now is between $9.10 million and $20.25 million. Obviously, there's some offset out there, but I think that's been discussed before. Even if the offset is 50% of that, the reality is, that's $10 million into the coffers of Santa Ana's budget. That would be nice to have here as well. Adelanto, the first time in 8 years, they're deficit free. Last, I want to end on this. This is in Santa Ana. This is called 420 Central. Its name is the same as its address. This is before cannabis. It was a dilapidated building that was vacant. After cannabis regulation, this is what it looks like. And here's what the great part of it is. Look to the right. If you look to the right, you'll see a building right there. What we've done is we've revitalized the entire neighborhood because of that. And because of that, if you look to the right of that building, you'll see a new building that just popped up. It's a neighbor. And the reason they're there is because of the security that we've put into that and the money we've put into that and revitalized that. That is a multi-million-dollar company that is manufacturing Bugattis and other supercars right now. The only reason they're there is because of that security system. That's more revenue. That is attendant revenue to the city. These are the types of things that I think Emerald Management can show this city because we've done it. We've done it in this area, and it's worked. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do any of you have any questions for any of the three presenters before we move on? Okay, so Dean, are you going to do a wrap-up?
Sure.
Before we do public comment?
Yes, and I appreciate the presentations from all of these groups. We've met with each one of them, and they're all very professional, and we certainly appreciate the information. They've been very open to our concerns in those discussions, and that continues today, so we appreciate that very much. I'll try to just sort of briefly hit some of the points that they brought up, and then happy to answer any questions. I'm going to turn over to John. After I'm done, I'll turn over to John to handle a couple of responses on the statistics in Colorado. With respect to Honestas, they did mention the fact that the state has had regulations in effect since 1996. Obviously, that's almost exclusively medicinal marijuana regulations. So this is a new thing in terms of recreational marijuana. It's a new thing for everybody, and those have only been in place since January 1st of this year. So again, we go back to the desire for us to learn from other cities and counties and their experience. They also talked about their working closely with the city of Santa Ana And we told them this when we met, and I'd like to emphasize it now. We fully believe that all of these entities here today are going to be good business operators. Many of them are from Corona. We have every reason to believe that they're not going to be the city's issue. It's the illegal operations that we believe will cost the city money and resources. So we don't want it to be implied that we're insinuating that our enforcement costs come from these businesses. That's not where the bulk of those concerns arise from. It arises from the illicit businesses. They talked about the money. The other groups talked about the money. Again, we would just emphasize that those are gross revenues, and time will allow us to learn what the true net cost to a city like ours might be. With respect to Main Street strategy, they did talk about the development agreement. I'd like to note, however, that you'd still need an ordinance, because you need an ordinance indicating that you're allowed to operate whatever you decide to operate via a development agreement. Anytime you're opening up the market for some but not all, even with a development agreement where you're telling some yes and telling some no, you're opening yourself up to potential litigation. And even when we met with them, I think everybody understands that the development agreement model is not the long-term solution. You're not going to be operating under those development agreements forever. That might be a temporary solution, might be a temporary pilot program, as they indicate, but it's not a long-term solution. And when you venture down the road of that temporary pilot program, you're opening that door, like we talked about. Inaction equals cost, absolutely true. There are costs to us now. We just believe that action increases those costs, and that's our concern. They also indicated that they believe that by acting, by getting into the regulatory market, you're decreasing illicit businesses. We just simply disagree with that. On that point, we disagree, and we had a lot of conversation with them when we met with them about that point. We simply disagree. We don't have, you're shown weed maps, that's almost exclusively delivery services. We don't have those sorts of costs, those sorts of illicit businesses that we need to deal with now by not being in the regulatory market. We just happen to believe and disagree with them that if we get into the regulatory market, our illicit business enforcement costs will go up. Just like it happens in other businesses. It happened with the massage establishments. It happens with the billboards now. Those good, solid businesses that we like operating in our town will pick up the phone and tell us about every illicit business. And I don't blame them, because if I'm operating legally, I would want all the illegal ones to go away because they're doing it cheaper than I'm doing it, and I would want them to go away. Initiatives are bad policy, for sure. We didn't mean to imply that we thought that initiative measures were the way to go. Our point for bringing that up was that we might find ourselves faced with an initiative measure, and at that point we'll be forced to act. Maybe with a competing initiative measure, maybe with educating the public about the cons of that initiative measure. Who knows what that might involve at the time. But we believe that if you're forced into a situation that could be a net cost to the city, that's one thing. We might find ourselves in a situation of being forced into that regulatory environment, but that's different than voluntarily stepping into an environment that could very well end up costing you net money over time. Main Street Strategy also indicated that they were not aware of another city who ventured into the regulatory environment and then found themselves faced with an initiative measure. I know the city of Colton is going through that right now. And it is true, the initiative measure, to my knowledge, has not qualified for the ballot, but it's exactly what we feared. The city was looking at allowing testing, I believe, and a couple of cultivators in town, limiting it to 2. That wasn't satisfactory to some in the industry, and they are attempting to place on the ballot an initiative measure that would allow, I don't believe it would allow have any cap on every aspect of the commercial marijuana business. So, yes, that has not qualified for the ballot, but it is in the process. 3.2 million, again, that's a great number, but that's a gross number. Last point with respect to what Emerald brought up, and then I'll turn it over to John on some of the statistics. Santa Ana's budget, estimating 9 to 20. Again, that's a hopeful number. That's not actuality. I would encourage us to wait and see the way that plays out.
A couple of quick thoughts about statistics. You know, in this day and age of social media and fake news, you can get on the internet and find just about any statistic you want. The statistics that Chief Patton mentioned earlier when he was giving his presentation come from a publication that the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force puts out every year. Let me just give you a little background on what that is. That's a task force that was created back in 1996 under the Clinton administration. It's been operating ever since. And it's comprised of law enforcement officers at both the federal level from at least 6 different agencies, including the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. Attorney's offices, as well as representatives from the 4 states in question, including Colorado, and as well as the local law enforcement agencies from the various cities and counties that are participants in that. So when they put out the data, you're hearing from federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. What they've said consistently, and we get these reports every year, is that traffic fatalities relating to marijuana are sharply higher. Traffic accidents relating to marijuana are sharply higher, not just for 3 months, but for years, for the 4 or 5 years since this was legalized. Hospitalizations are sharply higher. Emergency room visits are sharply higher. Adult use way up. College age use way up. Kids use way up. In every area that you can measure, it's been the same story every year that they've put out their new report. It's up in every conceivable way. So to say that there's been a slight decrease, for example, over a 3-month period is really not telling much of the story. One other statistic that I'll mention, then I'll pass it back to Dean. There was a reference to opioid deaths being 23% lower in states that don't have legalized cannabis. I think we all know why that's a fake statistic. You can get on the map and you can see where the concentration of the opioid epidemic is. It's in Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, and the Northeast. The fact that those states are not the ones that have necessarily legalized marijuana doesn't prove that there's any causation between legalization of marijuana and opioid deaths. That's correlation, not causation. So be careful when you look at statistics, whether they're talking about causation versus correlation, because there's a significant difference between the two.
Happy to answer any questions that you might have. I don't know if anybody, other staff members have anything to add to that. No. Then we're happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of quick questions. I do have the public comment cards, and I'm not ignoring those. Just real quick on the, it was mentioned there was 52% response for Riverside County. What was Corona's response?
I don't have that number. I think it was fairly close to that, if I remember correctly, but I don't know that statistic.
I had heard that it was like 50%, somewhere there was 50-50 kind of a thing. I guess the reason I'm asking that question, obviously, is there's not an overtly strong, overwhelming desire, but not to discount that there are half the people want it, or I should say half the people voted for it, but there is a strong, of the 50% that don't want it, it's a strong 50%. So, but what concerns me is if we have to do an ordinance for a tax measure, will that even pass? So, I mean, that's a concern that we could be going down a path that it may not even path. And then no one addressed what the possibility of the black market increase either way, whether we do or we don't, whether there be, pushing some of this underground. I know that there's been some discussion about that as far as the illicit businesses. So what is that projection would be? I mean, I've heard if the taxes keep going up and there's a high cost to doing business, that people will just go and do it illegally.
There's probably two aspects to that I think we should talk about. One is that every time that there's been some development at the state level, which has led us down the path of further accessibility or legalization, in our experience, both here in Corona and in other cities that we used to represent in private practice, there's always been an uptick in black market activity in the immediate aftermath of any attempt to move down the legalization path. We saw that, as Dean mentioned earlier, just a year and a half ago when Prop 64 passed. We hadn't had an operating dispensary in Corona for quite a while as of the passage of Prop 64. And literally within the first 6 months of 2017, we saw 6 new dispensaries open as well as a grow operation. So anecdotally, at least, our experience has been that the further we go, the more, not less, it encourages illegal activity. And from a pure economic standpoint, it's not hard to understand why that is. If you have to pay the high excise taxes and you have to be regulated at every step of the way, it's going to be easier to make money if you don't play by the rules. And our experience has generally been that most of the players in this industry don't play by the rules. Undoubtedly, there are a few that want to, and we don't, as Dean mentioned, have any doubt that the 3 that spoke want to. But in our experience over the past decade, there's many more that don't and won't.
As I can also mention in terms of, and I don't have all the statistics at my fingertips, but I do believe that, there's a general consensus that when the tax levels, both at the state and the local level, get to a certain percentage, whether it's 20 or 25 or 30%, whatever that happens to be, there is definitely a tipping point towards more illicit businesses. We just happen to believe that you'll still see illicit businesses even at the lower end of that, but there certainly are statistics that at some point that becomes very prevalent in terms of the illicit businesses. So,
Chief Patton, the city of Santa Ana was brought up multiple times. Have you heard or had any discussions with anyone from Santa Ana Police Department on this topic?
Yes, we had staff reach out and talk to their actual enforcement team and ask them what their caseload was like. And they average 15 to 25 cases, but like was mentioned, it's very early on. We're still in the first couple months of this.
So when you said 15 to 20 cases, that's strictly related to this topic?
Yes, correct.
Which they did not experience previous when they may have had illegal dispensaries or other means of selling marijuana.
They would have experienced some of that, but this is what their caseload has been from their inception of this team. And that was part of the adoption of their code, was they put in effect this team of 6 personnel.
Thank you.
Any questions? You want public comment now? Okay. Jim Scarlatta, followed by George Davis, followed by Tim Lynch. And these speakers will have 3 minutes. So Jim Scarlatta? He left? Okay, then George Davis, followed by Tim Lynch. He can do a blue card. Are you George? Somebody speak. All right, Tim Lynch.
Mayor, fellow council members, city manager, and outstanding staff. As most of you know, I'm in the infamous billboard business. that has been brought up a lot. However,
Not the illegal billboard.
that's right. However, I've been a legal operator in the city of Corona for over 30 years. Obviously, I understand how to operate in a highly regulated industry. On top of it, for the last 6 years, I've been in an agreement, contractual agreement with the city on a revenue sharing partnership with our digital signage, along with the fact that we donate tremendous amounts of public service for many community service developments and fundraisers within the city. We just did one for the YMCA for their, interesting enough, tequila and taquitos. I found that pretty interesting for the YMCA, but what can I say? We help out the Rotary every year with, which was one of the most successful fundraisers every year, I think, in the city, the Lobster Fest. That's our goal, is to be community service oriented, along with the revenue that we provide to the city, which is pretty substantial for a small company like myself. We are also members of the Amber Alert program. We institute 2 hours completely for the Amber Alerts, and the Amber Alert people will tell you that billboards are the most effective form of solving Amber Alerts, as we are able to put pictures up of the perpetrator and the victim and the vehicle. As far as the marijuana issue is, I don't want to put words in Dean's mouth, but I think it's inevitable. Whether you like it or not, it's coming. My grandparents were involved in the illicit alcohol trade back in the Depression area. Crazy Irishman. It's going to happen. Like it or not, it's going to. And there is something to be said to be first in, to be the leaders and to do it right. And a pilot program that allows you to set the bar and the standards high under a development agreement like we have for billboards, I think is a smart way to go. And the opportunity that the city has to lose that opportunity by waiting and letting the surrounding communities take your place, I believe would be a mistake. And that would be about all I would have to say, unless you have something else you'd like to ask.
Thank you. I think this is Ken Pavia, followed by David Morales, and then Trent Zepeda.
Good afternoon. Just wanted to bring something to light. With all due respect to your esteemed panel, they've represented to you that they've been able to shut down the 6 illicit retail storefronts that previously existed this calendar year in the city of Corona, and the ease of getting variant restraining orders, their ability to shut down establishments within a few weeks, and the ease that they're doing that. Yet, perhaps unbeknownst to them, there's presently 21 unlicensed cannabis businesses operating today in your city, and that's very easy. You can research that yourself. There's a website called weedmaps.com, which is an advertising platform for these businesses. There are 21 unlicensed businesses generating revenue and not being taxed, and included in those 21 businesses are 6 retail storefronts that are open to the public. Of these 6, one of them's having a grand opening with balloons out in front. So with all due respect to your city attorney and your esteemed council, sorry, not your council, your staff, it's happening, and they're not aware of it, and it's generating significant revenue, and it's funneling back into the illegal channel, which just then replicates itself. This is a enormous tax opportunity for you that they're unable to harness, unable to tax, unable to regulate, and it's happening whether they want it to happen or not. So as a resident here of Corona, I urge you, please, let's do it right. Let's tax it. Let's regulate it. Let's take what we should take. Let's take our share and use it for positive things for the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Weedmaps.com. Take a peek.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak to you. My name is David Morales. I live here in Corona. I have known Doug Hildorn for about 12 years now. Excuse me. Over those many years, I have come to know and appreciate the man, not only for his business sense, for there are probably more better business people out there, and not for his insight or evident abilities, because those are things that almost everyone of us is born with. I would like to talk about integrity. I have never met a man with more integrity in my life. Doug Hildorn, in business, as many of you know, there comes a time where you ask yourself almost every time you conduct business with someone, can I trust this person? Can I trust this person to do what they say they are going to do? Doug proved to me early on when I came to him and asked him difficult questions about difficult issues. He promised me he would always do the right thing. I'm here as living proof to tell you he always has. The money problems in the city are growing more severe with every passing day. Decisions will be made in this chamber that will affect the lives of every citizen in the city for years to come. I urge you now, speaking from my own personal experience, that you can rest easier if you allow Doug Hildorn and RSS Holdings to become your partner in this industry. In fact, I assure you, you cannot place your trust in better hands. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.
Thank you. We have Trent Zepeda, Jack Rain, and Dustin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council and staff. My name is Trent Zepeda. I'm a resident of Corona. I moved here about 18 years ago. I've known Doug Hildorn for that same period of time. I came to work for him in Corona and never left. Moved to the city shortly thereafter, raising my 4 beautiful children here. Through my first years of employment with Doug as a car salesman, which I know you can't always trust, but I was a good one, I promise. Through today, I'm a senior sales executive for his company, Ecology Incorporated, that is also, obviously, from the slides, located here in Corona. And all the time I've known Doug, I've never stopped learning from him. His knowledge of business, from the most basic information to the most minute detail, has always been excellent. Even when business was difficult and through adversity, there was always a very steady, very positive influence from Doug. It has been my great pleasure to work with him all these years. My kids, again, my 4 kids, they're involved in a lot of things in this city. 2 of my sons play for the Corona Chargers, Go Chargers. They swim, they do many activities, and I love this community. I want to see it thrive. I know that there are severe fiscal challenges facing the city. The passage of this ordinance and the granting of potential business opportunities to Honestas Holdings would be a great fit. Doug, his new company, will ensure that the business is created to last, will be compliant, of course, with all state and local law, and be served with the same honesty and integrity that Doug has always been known for. It's the only way he knows how to do things. It's the right way. I would recommend that the city pass this ordinance and that Honestas be granted the opportunity to do business in the city of Corona. I know from my experience that, hands down, they could not be entrusted to a better individual. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council and the city staff. My name is Jack Ryan, and I have been doing business here in Corona for 12 years. And I'd like to put a human face on this issue. I'd like to start today by telling you about my nephew. When he was born, he had a severe seizure disorder. Now, if you've ever seen an epileptic seizure, you know how scary it is. Well, imagine, if you will, that you have 400 a day. From infancy, my nephew, whose name is Jack, by the way, was put on a regimen of 12 different medications to control this disorder. These meds put him in a near catatonic state. His seizures dropped from hundreds a day to 40 or 50, so we saw this as a victory. This continued for 3 years. Doctors predicted Jack's life expectancy would be 10 to 12 years. It was recommended to our family that we try a cannabis extract and to try to control his seizures. And since we tried everything possible, we did this. He started receiving sublingual drops twice a day. The results were nothing short of miraculous. His seizures went from 50 or 60 a day down to 2 or 3 a month. More to the point, this boy started to live. He started to eat, and he started to laugh again, and he started to talk. And now he rides his bicycle, and now he's 11 years old, and Jack is doing great. Now, the reason I tell you this is because the city is in a unique position to enable its citizens to take advantage of what might be one of the most successful and financially rewarding markets in history. A market that by value has already exceeded the gold rush of the 1870s. This new gold rush is legal cannabis. I love the movie Patton, and in the movie, George C. Scott, who plays the general, says at one point in the movie to one of his staff members, he says, "I have exactly the right tool at precisely the right time at exactly the right moment of history." So does the city council. The financial burdens that the city is faced with grow more severe every day. A well-regulated, well-run, and expansively organized cannabis industry and a cannabis marketplace in the city of Corona would reap a windfall for the city that will not happen again, perhaps for decades. To stand on the sidelines, especially early in the stage in California, could possibly prove to be the tipping point to the city's finances. I urge the city to take advantage of this precise moment in history. I knew that I had to be part of this industry when I watched it perform a miracle. My friend and business associate, Doug Heldorn, who I have known for 20 years, is the best person you can choose for this industry. Your success will be predicated on who you partner with in this industry, and you can't have a better partner than Doug Heldorn. By your positive action on these ordinances, we can continue this success and quite possibly perform another miracle for the city of Corona. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.
I'm just going to reconfirm that George Davis and Jim Scarlatta are not speaking, correct? Okay. We have Dustin and Joe Morgan.
So I want to start with a Mark Twain quote. There are 3 kind of lies. There are lies, there are damn lies, and then there's statistics. So I'm not here today to argue statistics. I think that the jury's out. You can show a number of different studies. What I'm here to talk about is the fact that whatever happens is still going to happen in the city of Corona. Whether the DUIs spike or they decrease, wherever people are buying cannabis, if it's illicit, non-illicit, the unfunded enforcement liability is still going to come before you. And you're going to have to, figure out a way to pay for that. So what I'd like to talk about today is the revenue specific to cannabis ordinances in other cities. So not projections, but actual figures from other jurisdictions. So the city of Palm Springs, mind you, this is medical cannabis only, and they're doing dispensaries and some cultivation, but not distribution to all of Southern California. Where Corona is placed, you have the ability to service Los Angeles, San Diego, Inland Empire, Orange County. So you have the largest cannabis market in the world at your fingertips. There's a reason why Amazon and FedEx are here. So Palm Springs has been collecting $1.5 million annually just on medical marijuana sold in dispensaries. So that's $1.5 million just from dispensaries. Sacramento has been making more than $4.4 million per year on cannabis, again, medical only, and this is just basically cultivation and dispensing up into this point. And then there's a number of other jurisdictions that I can identify, and I'm happy to follow up with that are in the millions of dollars. What I put forward as far as projections go are quite modest. Cultivation at 25 million in annual gross receipts, that's only two 22,000 square foot facilities. And now we're not suggesting that you do a lot of cultivation because, as Dean pointed out, things are going to plummet over time, but bring in a few brands that are going to be able to sustain that. Manufacturing, 50 million, that's $1.5 million in revenue. Distribution, another 50 million, that's $500,000 in revenue. Retail, 10 million, that's $500,000 in revenue for a total of 3.25 million. That's very conservative. I think that those numbers are grossly undercalculated. And, you know, if you want to talk about net revenues, what I'd love to do is follow up with you and we can talk to the city of Sacramento and other jurisdictions that have had to offset these costs. But mind you, the majority of these costs with respect to staff time through development agreement are placed on the operator. So the person that's putting forward the development agreement is paying to subsidize all of that staff time. So in closing, I just would like to ask you to explore this topic further and read the proposal that I've put forward and consider directing staff to further explore that and come back with a development agreement ordinance that would be right sized for this community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, I'll just address myself as the resident, since that's what I'll probably be referred to afterwards. Of course, you know, like usual, I'll point out the obvious, that you're handling an issue of seems to be great interest to the people of Corona during the day when nobody can be here. You do it in the dark. You do it without attaching the reports, without attaching the staff reports to any of the agenda, so we don't have any of the information ahead of time. We see it when we walk in the room. Thanks a lot. It really goes to, you guys can talk about transparency all you want, but you don't handle things in a transparent fashion. You just don't. You could attach it. It's easy. You already had the file. Obviously, they spent time making up the presentation. You can stick it right to the agenda, just like you would for every other meeting. You know, you do it without staff reports, without any significant public notice. I see you got your survey back out. You know, your tax hike survey. You know, why not throw a question or two on there? How about that? You know, I mean, you can notify people and you can involve people when you want to involve people, but you don't want to involve people in this because it's already sort of predetermined. You could tell this from about a mile away which way is this going to go. So, I mean, didn't really do any outreach. As I believe as Dustin said, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. I'm not a fan, but this is going to happen. This is going to happen. It's already happening. If you think that if you're going to ban the sales, you know, that people aren't going to be smoking it and doing whatever they're going to be doing, it's going to be happening regardless. Like many things, we're going to miss the boat. You know, we're going to miss it. You know, we're going to miss the opportunity because that's what we do here. That's our city motto, you know, missing the opportunity. You know, you grant other businesses similar agreements that I would argue cause a lot more harm. You know, I mean, I would say that the HERO program, of which you've offered you've given them a formal franchise agreement in this city. HERO has caused more damage than allowing licensed cannabis use or cannabis sales here in Corona. There's more people that have probably gone bankrupt or lost their houses or been harmed financially, medically, and in every other way from other agreements that you've offered around here. I mean, really, I know which way this is going to go, and this is the way it was supposed to go. You're supposed to handle this and kind of smother it in the dark, like many things that you do. So, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, the question at the end of the day, you know, you can recover the cost like you do for every other kind of enterprise that you allow here. You can establish what the costs are. You do it day in and day out with many other permits and many other types of businesses. You're acting like these businesses are going to be different than any other business or any kind of manufacturing. And the real question is, are you a business-friendly city or not? Are you only friendly to the city, to the businesses that you tend to frequent and that tend to be owned by your friends? That's the real question. Are you really business-friendly or aren't you? I don't think you are. Thank you.
Is there anybody else wishing to address the council on this? Did you want to come up? Thank you. Make sure you fill out a blue card when you're done.
I may have misplaced that, but I will. Mayor, thank you. City Council and staff, thank you guys. My name is Adam Owens. I'm a local resident here in the Corona area. I raise my family, my wife. We have a lot of friends that are very involved in this local community. I am a principal of Emerald Management Group. One thing that I wanted to state here before you, council, is I've owned a fairly successful company and been in the community for a long time and employ quite a bit of people here in the area. And we raise our children and we have friends. We're very involved in the community, very involved in the chamber. And when I kept Elmore Management Group out of my life here in Corona, as we've been in other cities, and to approach the city and kind of put myself out there, as the city has known me to be somewhat of a successful businessman in the local area, took a lot of courage. But as some people here today said, it's inevitable and at some point it was going to come. So in approaching you guys and putting my name out there, I knew that there was something possibly to lose. Maybe friendships, maybe people in the community that looked at me as a respectable businessman now may look at me slightly different. People that play on my children's soccer team or go to school may look at me or judge me slightly different than the businessman that I was. But I took that step, that leap of faith, knowing that it could hurt some of those relationships, some of the relationships with people that I have here, Mr. Calvert, who I frequently visit there in DC, and other relationships that I have with people tied to my business there in Washington. But I just wanted to say thank you guys for hearing us out, that being a local citizen here in the city, that doing this the right way is imperative to me, because this is a city that I raised my children in, and it's a city that I employ people in, and if it's going to be done, we want it done the right way. And I think that you guys making a decision on who you go into a relationship with, it should be someone that you guys understand how they operate, that there are personal relationships with, and that you guys know that you can lean on them and trust them because they've proven themselves before, and there is a lasting foundation of who they are as a businessman, as someone in the local community. So again, we appreciate the staff and all they've done to bring forward the presentations today, as well as the other groups. They've done a great job. I think a lot of their numbers, the last gentleman that spoke, are true. Those are very good, accurate numbers, and we look forward to having the opportunity again to address this issue, and we thank you guys for your time today. So that's it. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Wishing to address the council on this. Okay, seeing none, do my colleagues have any questions, comments?
Mayor, before we do that, can we just respond to a couple of things? Just
Oh, sure, please.
for clarity? One of the, a couple of the speakers referenced weed maps, and weed maps is certainly something that staff monitors, if not daily, weekly. And so we did pull up weed maps, and there are a number who are delivery services, and we're aware of the delivery services, and we're aware of the difficulty of enforcement efforts against delivery services. So that has not been a focus of staff's limited resources. We do not focus on illegal delivery services because of the cost and time that would be associated with pursuing those folks. There's actually 4 retail establishments, none of which are in the city of Corona. They're in the county unincorporated pockets. And so we are aware of those types of facilities. They've been operating in the county for as long as we've had a prohibition, probably. So to our knowledge, and checking weed maps as the meeting progresses, there are no retail establishments in the city of Corona. The development agreement costs were noted as being covered by the entity. Again, the time that it would take to draft the development agreement, negotiate the development agreement, the time that it would take to draft the ordinance is not the city's concern. It's the enforcement costs. So while those costs will be covered, developing the development agreement, that is not our concern. It's principally of enforcement costs. This is going to happen. Heard a couple of folks mention that, and we would likely agree that it's going to happen. And the comment was made, act now so you can do it right. We don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. We don't think that waiting prevents you from doing it right. In fact, we believe that waiting allows you to do it better. It was mentioned that we can recover our costs. you can recover your permitting costs. We can factor those things into the cost that it would take to get the permit. What you can't recover, what you can't guarantee a recovery for, is once again, your enforcement costs. So we can cover the cost of issuing permits and the like. You can recover certain staff costs, but the bulk of the costs are not things that you can guarantee that you'll ever recover for. So I guess to end, we'll do what the council would like to do from a policy perspective, and staff will do it right, for sure. But we would just recommend that if we do this, if we get into the regulatory business, don't do it for the money. Because we don't believe we believe there's a risk that you won't end up netting money. So if we're going to do it, let's not do it with the assumption that it's for the city to make money, because we're concerned that the city will not net money.
Okay, I'll go. A few of the notes that I have is the concern with the PD to test drivers. And again, that's whether we have sales in Corona or not. That's still a concern. Hopefully that will be coming sooner rather than later. I know there's a lot of people, just like there's a gold rush to sell, there's also a gold rush to enforce and sell and service the industry. The people who made the money in the gold rush were actually the hardware stores. It wasn't the miners. So that's a lot of what's going on right now. One of the concerns that I still have with any of the businesses, whether it's manufacturing, distribution, and especially retail, is the cash aspect of the business. With until there is an easier way for people to deposit and to move the money around, there would be a huge disincentive to report actual sales because it's all cash. So that would be something that would be very hard to enforce, especially on the retail side. The other sides, you can go by amount of product sold or manufactured or transported. Some of it was on some of the fees here that Santa Ana is getting. It would be interesting to see how close that turns out to be to reality. I know I talked to a business person who purchased a building in Cathedral City, and it was in a specific plan area that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. So he had two options. He could convert it into an auto dealership, or they said, well, you can't do sales tax generating business, but you could turn that building into a grow house. It made absolutely no sense. And to convert his building into a grow house was a $150,000 once a year permit fee. So I don't see that as a huge, as Dean said, a huge cash windfall, because if you have only $150,000 for that, that's not enough to pay for one officer. So and that doesn't include fire, doesn't include code enforcement, doesn't include anything else. And as far as locations for retail, depending on which direction we eventually go, many, many years ago, before any of us were on city council, there were issues with adult businesses. And there was actually a map that was done to make it legal to have an adult business in Corona. And you had to, there were pockets that were so far away from homes, so far away from schools, so far away from churches. So there were very few of those areas available, but they were available. So I think that's something that would need to be researched to see which ones of those areas, if retail does ever happen, that would coincide with those type of restrictions, how far away from other areas that we wouldn't want sales to be happening. And I know we received a few emails encouraging us to pass the ordinance, which we don't even have an ordinance, so I thought that was interesting. But one of the emails was someone from a bong manufacturer with a listing to his website, so that was interesting to see. To enact the will of the people. And I think as Karen mentioned, it was less than 400 votes is how it passed in the city of Corona. It was 25,800 for and 25,400 no for the city of Corona. So the citizens voted basically that half and half. So, personally, I don't have a big issue with manufacturing, the distribution side. I have a problem more with the retail side only because I've seen some of the issues in areas where the retail has happened. I was in Denver before recreational was allowed, and there was a store on virtually every other corner. There were more marijuana stores than there were Starbucks, believe it or not. And we were in Boulder a few months ago, and I actually looked for marijuana stores. So from a staff perspective, I don't really want staff to do a whole lot of research personally at this point, but one of the things I would like staff to find out is how Boulder has successfully hidden any retail. So they either have none, because I was in industrial areas, I was in retail areas, I was in downtown areas, just for the different meetings and places we went. And I didn't see a single one, but when you go to Denver, there's one on every corner. So obviously, even within Colorado, there are ways that the regulation has been different than it is in Denver. What I personally would like to see is the parties that came together today to make their presentations to get together themselves and come up with some sort of a plan, a coherent plan to bring to the council of what you would like to see done, what the costs would be for operators of any one of those segments, and how we would enact it to help resolve some of the issues you've heard here today from staff. So that's what I would like to see happen. Like I said, I don't really want to see staff spending a lot more time on it until, we have nice presentations, but they're not really concrete presentations. And so I'd like to see, if we're going to move forward with anything, is that those parties spend their time, their energy, their money to put together plans. Because if we were to allow something, I don't see how we would be able to say, oh yeah, we like number 2. We can't just pick one out of a group. We would have to come up with some sort of a reason and some sort of a vetting process. And I don't think it's really our staff that should be going through and spending all their time and spinning all their wheels doing that, because it's not our staff that is excited and wants to do this, as you've heard today. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Thank you. Boy, this is a day for cliches, so we're not going to use them, but Mr. Durlis said something that was brilliant. He said, if you're doing it, don't do it for the money, okay? Well, let's assume for a second that we didn't do it for the money and it was a zero-sum game. In other words, we took in this many dollars, we spent out that many dollars. Well, that's kind of silly to do that, I think, because we could do other things that would be better. So we don't work for free. So that's a great point that you brought up, and I thank you for that. If it's a revenue wash, then it's silly to proceed that way. However, it may not be a revenue wash. The term was brought up that action versus action and costs and things like that. This is what I'm going to suggest. As much as I respect and like this fella, I'm going to disagree with him. Rather than the 3 entities that we hear, working together. I don't think you ought to. I think you ought to come back and bring us some coherent plans of what you think you want to do in our fair city, okay? Now, somebody else said statistics, you know, numbers, bigger numbers and statistics. Well, we need to get some realistic numbers, okay? Because if one guy said, well, we're going to make 3, the other guy said, we're going to make 4, the other guy said, we're going to make 5, well, that's not realistic for us to do. Mrs. Eden can pick apart almost anything, and that's what we're going to use it for to do, but realistically, we can't do that. What we need for you to do is bring back a plan of what you think you should do in the city of Corona, and then we'll go on with that. And I think a business plan, a coherent business plan, would include a projected revenue. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to respectfully ask the 2 chiefs, okay, Patton and Duffy, for you 2 guys to get together over coffee and say, hey, what do you think this is really going to cost us? Because again, if it's going to cost you 5 and these fellas are going to commit at 4, well, we don't want to do that because we're going to lose 1. So let's not do that. However, I do think that this could be a revenue, a large revenue income source. I truly do. Mr. Lynch mentioned the prohibition, and right after the prohibition was canceled, there was a large revenue source for municipalities. The other thing, Chief Patton, I'm going to sideswipe, and I hate doing that. You know I do, okay? Since the passage of this, since January 1st, have you noticed a large increase in marijuana-related crimes in Corona? And if you don't have an answer, you can decline to answer if you choose.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
And that's
since
fair.
January
And that's
1st.
fair. And again, I apologize because everybody knows, all you guys on the front, that I tried never to sideswipe you, and I just did, and I sincerely apologize for that. But what I want you to do, if you would, sir, is find out if we've had a large increase. I've heard a rumor that you can buy marijuana within a mile radius of this building now, okay? So if you can buy it now illegally, and we're subsidizing the crime, then we should be aware of that, and we should put that on our spreadsheet, okay? Something else I was thinking about was somebody said something about being the first ones in. Let's just say, I'm not saying we are, I'm not saying we're not, because you can't make a good decision unless you get all the facts. Let's just say that we do institute a program like this, okay? Well, there are cities around us, without mentioning any names, that don't have that. And I'm thinking this, that if a person wants to imbibe in this particular substance, they might come to Corona, buy it, and then drive back to their own particular city and use it in the comfort of their backyard. So that could be, you know, income with no outgo. It could be, but again, I think we should need to study that. And I know it's going to be a lot of work, gentlemen, ladies. I know it's going to be a lot of work, but I think to make the right decision for the 166,000 people we've got in Corona, we have to know what we're doing, okay? And we're not going to do it because I don't know it, but I know a guy that knows a guy, and that's you fellas and ladies, okay? So please, this is my recommendation, that the gentleman who came here with the businesses, okay, bring back a coherent plan of what you think you ought to do, and have our staff bring back some plans, and then we'll do it again. Will we make a decision that particular day? Probably not. But this is a major, major undertaking. This is brand new. This is revolutionary, okay? And we have to make the right decision for everybody. Thank you.
So first off, I want to thank city staff for the information that you presented today, and this being the first time we've seen it. I also want to thank each of the presenters that came and took their time to give us information. I agree with many of the comments that Mr. Montanez mentioned, so I will not go over those except for one, that the vote that passed Proposition 64 and has been alluded to was not an overwhelming push that this is absolutely needed at 52% for Riverside County. That does not indicate to me that this community, Riverside County, is desperate to have this. All of the voters want it. Going to the other side, or the most critical side for me, and that has to do with revenue. For me, the revenue is unknown, and it's like starting up a new business. That's the feel you get when you watch the presentations. They're talking about a new business starting up. We have difficulty even getting information from other locations because they're in the process of starting up new businesses. And anytime somebody's starting up a new business, the revenue generated is unknown. Will the business succeed? Will it barely succeed? Will it fail? Will it just take off and go? We don't know. And what I heard today in these presentations were the comments of the dollars could top, the dollars might be, the dollars could generate. And when we're talking about our general fund, I'm not real confident whether could be, a could top, a might be. The other aspect is staffing needs and time. We've heard from our employees that they are stretched to the max, and I certainly understand that. I believe them 100%. And to add something like this onto them at this time is a tremendous burden that I can't step forward in doing for them or placing upon them. I look at our police department. Again, this is an area where we don't know, because it's a new area, what are the new requirements going to be for them. In addition to that, we heard many references to Santa Ana. So you heard me ask the question, what are they finding out in Santa Ana? And really, it's too early. Don't know. And again, I can't place things on our police department where we don't have data, because I want to support our police department and I don't want to put an additional burden on them, and there's the potential of doing that. Again, I get back to the general fund. We don't know what the revenues would be from this, or if there even will be any revenues. And yes, as many of the speakers said, and those coming up during public comment mentioned, there are revenue issues in this city. But this is not a guaranteed revenue generator. We get back to could be, might be. I can't live on that. And so if there's an entity that wants to come and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put $100 million into your general fund. And if you make this dollar amount, then you get to keep it. And if not, the city just keeps it. That way it takes out the fact that it's a might be, a could be. If there's $100 million there, it's $100 million, and it's guaranteed the city gets $100 million. Because I need guarantees to the best of my ability moving forward for the benefit of our employees and our community. Thank you.
I absolutely agree it's going to happen. This is a state law. My concern is it's not a federal law. The whole incident over Ronnie Knowles' case that we've already cited from 2008, 6-8, whatever it was the DEA came in Corona and they took over an establishment at that time because it was illegal. They could come back because it's still illegal. There's still too much of a gray area for me to feel comfortable. And that gray area leads to our police department. There's no breathalyzer. There's no true fact of saying you were under the influence. You're putting our officers in a situation of having to make determination that could be challenged down the line. There's no banking institution that could take the money, so you're going to come and pay your permit fees and all the dollars that we're supposedly getting in cash. Those are the three main ones, as well as it was mentioned, with it being illegal federally and the inability with the cash, and what's going to happen with grants and all the different monies that possibly could be affected if the feds decide to make issue of it. These are the unknowns for me that are more important, because you're putting too many people out there, and particularly I'm being selfish, our staff, whether it's finance with the monies or our police officers on the streets, all the other things that go with the unknowns of, extra code enforcement, extra law enforcement, extra fire inspections, extra community development with inspections. I mean, there's a list. And yes, it's been said that we can make anywhere from $2 to $5 million, depending on what we're going to do. But once again, we shouldn't be going in wanting the money. We should go in feeling comfortable that we are prepared. And I can't feel comfortable being prepared until some of those answers, and unless somebody can tell me what's going to happen state versus federal. I mean, my book, federal trumps state, so if there's a question, then the feds will override whatever the state does. I know we as voters, it was 50-50 here in Corona. It's going to happen. People use it now. People are going to be using it. My concern is until some questions get answered, I'm not saying no right. I'm saying I'm concerned about now, but no, not down the line. If anybody has answers to those specifics that I have concerns about, I'd be more than happy to entertain moving forward. Not that we can't have, as Mr. Montanez or Mr. Haley is talking down the line, as having more involvement. We just got this huge staff, and I was thumbing through it, of different pilot programs and different things that are happening in Desert Hot Springs and Sacramento and some of the other places. But they're pilot programs that just began. The risk of being the first out there, this is one time I don't want to be the first out. We've been the first out there on many things, and we've tried things. We've been successful at some and unsuccessful at others. And some of those unsuccessful has cost the city money. We are not in a time that we can be unsuccessful and lose money, and that's another concern. So I'm just kind of at a hold right now than moving forward. So I don't know what we want to direct staff, because it's on the agenda is make some decisions as far as direction.
Well, I think it sounded like at least three, if not all of us, agreed not to spend a lot of staff time on this. I think we're in agreement on that. I think really it's going back into the ballpark for well, not even applicants, but the proponents to try to come up. They know what the questions are. They know what the concerns are. And, it took a long time to get this meeting together because of both staff time to put this meeting together and some of your time to put the presentations together. So I think it would behoove everybody to kind of just take that step and look at what you feel the next step would be, and then bring something back. I don't think if any one of you, if you don't get all together, that's fine. But if any one of you were to bring something back, that the other proponents wouldn't also be here at the same time. So I think that would, in my mind, would be really about the next step. But I don't think there's any consensus to be spending staff time on this right now.
And it sounds like we're all in agreement it's going to happen, but just not going to be the first out of the gate in making it happen. Unless someone can answer the questions and the concerns that we have expressed, and that's what Mr. Montanez is saying in terms of bringing something forward. Maybe you can. Maybe you have different answers. But I've been all along saying I'm not willing to jeopardize my police officers and my finance and everything else until I have those answers. And maybe they're out there and I'm just not aware of them, so.
May I?
Please.
What I had suggested in my proposal was to have the three entities come back to us and say, this is what our plan is. And I'm going to restate that if you feel that strongly, write it down, come on back, and we'll perhaps entertain it again. And if it does make sense, then Chief Patton and Chief Duffy take the day off tomorrow, and we'll wait for the entities to come back, and then we'll move forward. I think this is a big deal. I really, really do, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw you the ball. If you think you think it makes sense, put together a comprehensive plan of what you think that you want to do in the city of Corona, and then come on back. Because this is what I know. If we should have entity number one say, well, this is what we want to do, and you want to build this and build that and build it, you're going to be doing that. We're not going to be losing any money. Now, could we be losing money if we all of a sudden have to hire more people and stretch the staff a little bit more? Yeah, we are. Do I want to do that? Absolutely not. But I want to do that if it makes sense. Okay, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to restate my request that you do what you have to do and then come on back. This is a study session. Okay, this is a study session. We're not getting married. So do what you got to do to bring back what you want to do, and we'll go on from there.
I just want to ask, Mr. Derleth, is their contact going to continue to be you or Mrs. Coletta? Who's the contact?
That's up to you. It doesn't matter to us. Contact for what? Additional proposals or?
And if any reason they want to get back in touch with city staff? So it's you.
It's me.
Yeah.
It's me.
You're it. Congratulations.
Does everybody understand that we agreed that it's going to be happening at some point? So let us know how we can get there, resolving some of the questions that we have and making your proposals. Clear as mud? Okay. With that, we're going to move, if there's any public comment on anything that was not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we are going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.